Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay, members, that's us in open session.
Just in the nick of time.
Just while Peter and David get seated there, we'll do the normal housekeeping arrangements.
You're up on the casual thing, I did it. Yeah.
Advise members, just bring the meeting to order. Advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. and advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and the password details for that are on the gallery rules. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So at this point I will make a start with item 1 on the agenda, and that's apologies. So we don't have any apologies for today's session, but just to note that Colin will be joining virtually, so hopefully the clerk and the team will be able to make sure Colin is connected okay and can hear the proceedings and can contribute when he needs to come in. Item 2 is Chairperson's business, and just one item there, item 2.1, and that's in your tabled papers, which is a record of an informal meeting with the Education Against Violence Empowerment Project. So I would want to just really, first of all, thank the witness in that informal briefing. It was very personal evidence that was given in the session, and I think that was one of the reasons why we had gone for the informal setting rather than in the main inquiry. It was really helpful evidence, but I think I would like to propose that we do write and specifically thank them for the evidence that they gave and for being prepared to share such a personal account with members, and obviously just to then make sure that the evidence that was submitted is added to the RSE inquiry papers. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. That takes us on to item 3 on the agenda, and that's declaration of interests. Are any declarations of interest that a member needs to raise for any items on the agenda today? No. As normal, if anything arises, do indicate if something comes up as the meeting goes ahead. Item 4 then is matters arising. I hope members will just permit me to try and get through all of this as quickly as possible, because we have got a lot of quite substantial evidence to hear today. So item 4.1 there is correspondence from Sophie King-Hill, who had presented last week to the committee, and that's at page 7, and that's some further information that had been requested on the work of the Safer Together project, Boys Impact Pack project, and also specifically highlighting the work of a local academic professor, Kieran McCartan. So he's from Northern Ireland, but working out of the University of the West of England. Our members content to note, add all of that material to the inquiry papers, and also I would like to suggest we had made a decision around not inviting any further physical oral briefings, but I think it would be appropriate to invite Professor McCartan to make a written submission to the inquiry. Are members agreed? Agreed. Item 4.2 is correspondence from our other presenter to the inquiry last week, Maria Lohan, and that's at page 89, and that's providing that specific information that I had asked for on the If I Were Jack programme, although I think it may have been in the papers already, which was my oversight, so apologies if that was the case, but it's there for you to access as required. So I would just propose that we note that and that that additional material goes into the inquiry papers. We agreed? Great. Okay. So there is also in matters arising just a few bits to deal with around correspondence from last week. We unfortunately lost quorum for a section of the meeting when we were dealing with correspondence. So there were some provisionally agreed items, and I just want to run through those and just check that members are all agreed that we can proceed. So that would be item, and this was from last week's papers, item 9.5. The committee suggested we note correspondence from the Committee for Finance around the extension of bereavement services. Item 9.6. The committee noted correspondence from the Committee for the Economy regarding the 14 to 19 strategy and proposed writing to the Department of Education to seek an update on that. Item 9.7 noted a Northern Ireland Audit Office report on managing the school's estate and agreed to invite the Audit Office to provide an oral briefing on the report. Item 9.8, the committee agreed to arrange a visit or potentially a committee session at Glen Bay Special School. Item 9.9, the committee noted correspondence from Buddy Bear Trust and agreed to write to the Minister seeking his views on the funding arrangements for the school. And item 9.10, the committee noted a response from the Minister regarding his attendance at committee. And item 9.11, the committee noted correspondence from the Youth Assembly regarding the guidance issued by the Department of Education on the 3rd of September on the use of mobile phones in schools and agreed to share that with the department. Can I just get agreement now that we have all members here that we can progress all those items as outlined? Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay. item 5 is the draft minutes. So I would refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 13th of November 2024, and that's at page 92 of your papers. Our members agreed that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed. That's grand. If I could just get a copy to sign, and then we move on. Thank you. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me. I know we've rattled through that, but we really do have a big agenda today, and I would rather get to the evidence sessions than taking up too much time with administrative issues. I'll just say at the outset, and yes, but I'll just let the witnesses for our first session get seated. If I could just say to members at the outset, we do have a lot to get through. I think that the 3 briefings that are on here all cover issues that I think we're very keen to get the opportunity to ask questions on. So I'm going to try and maybe hold 2 ideas in tension. I will have to keep a close eye on time so that we do get through the business and that everybody does get the opportunity to question the witnesses. I'm also aware that there may be a degree of latitude needed. These are substantive topics that we're looking at today. I'm prepared to give a little bit of latitude around timings, but if there are long preambles and lots of speeches, that if members choose to use their time for those purposes, then you will not be given the time to ask questions. So that's I hope that I can't be clearer than that. I'm also, aware, the SEN briefing coming up in particular is one of our key strategic priorities on the committee. If there are issues where members feel that they have something to contribute when another member is questioning, and if there's another question they feel would maybe help open an issue up, again, I am comfortable with that, but I would ask that we do that through the chair, and if I make the decision that we need to let the member who had raised the original query be given extra time, that members respect that. So hopefully that's not all too directive, and will help us get through the business today in good time. So, sorry you had to sit and listen to all our administrative discussions to begin with, but I would just refer members now to item 6 on the agenda, and that is an oral briefing from CCEA, and that is in your packs at page 98. And we're looking at this specifically as just I would highlight before the briefing starts that it is Children's Grief Awareness Week, and the committee had an interest around the special consideration process in particular for examinations, and that was with a particular focus around how that caters for young people who have been impacted by bereavement, but the wider issues as well around how that system operates. So I would refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 98. We have a Joint Council for Qualifications guide to the special considerations process at page 100, and a Youth Assembly report on bereavement support and grief education at page 130. So I would like to welcome here today, we have 2 witnesses from CCEA attending. We have Michael McCauley, Interim Director of Qualifications, and Ronan Carberry, Temporary Business Manager. So you're both very welcome at committee today, and thank you for giving up your time. Before I begin, I think it's important we do have them here next week, but I want to just put on record my appreciation for the work of Marie Curie that has been highlighted this week. They had an excellent event today up at Riddell Hall at Queen's University, outlining their report into compassionate school communities with a real focus on a range of issues, but particularly bereavement policies in school, the need for good grief education in school, and also the need to appropriately train teachers so that they can provide that care and support for children and young people impacted by these issues. So I just want to put on record that I think it's an excellent report, and we've got an evidence session from them next week, which I think we're all looking forward to. But in terms of our evidence session today, I would invite you now to make an opening presentation. We have a really tight agenda today, so if I could ask up to 10 minutes, and absolutely no need to take the full 10 minutes if it's not needed, and then we'll move to question and answer, and we will be looking at really up to 5 minutes per member for each inquiry. But over to you.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of CCEA, I want to thank you and the committee members for the opportunity to speak today about measures relating to bereavement and assessment for students taking examinations. At CCEA, we endeavour to do what we can within the regulations to minimise the impact of any trauma or event that may affect a candidate entered for our qualifications. and completing examinations is a pressurised time for many students and increased significantly for those who experience a bereavement, especially if they have lost a member of their immediate family. We're also conscious today's briefing is taking place during Children's Grief Awareness Week, which is supported by the Childhood Bereavement Network, whose policy focus this year is on grief education. Given the focus of today's briefing, we will explain the approach taken by SEN if a candidate sitting examinations has been impacted by a recent bereavement, how we arrive at a final mark in the assessments, and the parameters in which these decisions are taken. We will also set out for the committee the arrangements in place for students who are unable to sit their examinations and the options open to them. We will also provide an overview of resources and the support available for students and teachers, and will welcome your questions and further discussion at the end. To begin with, it's important to state that it is a requirement for all regulated awarding organisations to have in place a policy for special consideration, and this stipulation is set out in condition G7 of the regulatory document, the General Conditions of Recognition. To ensure we at SEN meet this condition, we follow the guidance set out in the Joint Council for Qualifications document, a guide to the special consideration process, which we shared with you last week. It is through this that the impact of bereavement suffered by a student in close proximity to examinations and assessment is recognised and acknowledged. The JCQ is a membership organisation comprising the 8 largest qualification providers in the UK, including SEN, which is a founding member, along with AQA, Pearson, OCR and WJEC amongst others. Its purpose is to bring unity on issues of examination administration and, when appropriate, on qualification and wider education policy. JCQ was set up in 2004, succeeding the Joint Council for General Qualifications, which was established in 1998. A key objective of JCQ is to advance public education by enabling members to work together where possible to provide common administrative arrangements for examinations, thereby reducing bureaucracy for schools and colleges and providing a consistent approach for all candidates, no matter which awarding organisation they are taking their qualification with. All members collectively agree and adhere to the procedures and guidance documents which cover a wide range of administrative areas, and the schools and colleges enter for these qualifications are also required to follow them. Along with the guide to the special consideration process, JCQ also provides guidance to schools and colleges on areas such as access arrangements and reasonable adjustments, instructions for conducting examinations, examination appeals, post-result services, and general regulations for approved centres. So what is special consideration? It is a tried and tested means of support for students taking examinations, and it is applied for by a school or college on behalf of candidates who have faced an illness, injury or indisposition around the time of their examination, to provide recognition of the difficulty they have faced and the impact it has had on their performance in their assessments. It is through this that all awarding organisations will acknowledge the impact of a family bereavement on a candidate taking examinations. We accept, however, that special consideration can only go some way to assist a candidate affected by potentially wide-ranging difficulties, emotional or physical, which may influence performance in their assessments, particularly a bereavement. It cannot remove the difficulty faced by those candidates. This means there will be some situations where a decision is taken not to enter a candidate for a qualification or an examination, and this is because only minor adjustments can be made to a mark awarded. Now, in terms of eligibility, all assessments measure what a candidate knows, understands and can do. In terms of how it is applied, candidates will be eligible for special consideration if they have been fully prepared and have covered the whole course, but their performance in the examination or in the production of coursework or non-exam assessment is materially affected by adverse circumstances beyond their control. This includes bereavement. Eligibility for special consideration on grounds of bereavement is time-bound, so candidates are not eligible for special consideration if they have been affected by bereavement more than 6 months before the assessment, unless, for example, an anniversary has been reached at the time of the assessment or there are ongoing implications such as an inquest or a court case. The process for applying for special consideration is straightforward. The examination centre, i.e. the school, applies for special consideration on behalf of the candidate through SEN's online portal, and applications can be submitted in the following categories: present but disadvantaged, partial absence or full absence, i.e. for an examination paper. Following this, the examination officer must provide the reason for the application from a predetermined list, and the options are illness or injury, bereavement, domestic crisis or other. They can then provide more detail through a free text function which must include the date of the bereavement, the date of the assessment and the nature of the relationship between the candidate and the deceased person. Applications can only be submitted on or after the date of the assessment and up to 7 days after the date of the last SEA timetabled examination in the examination series. To ensure the application process is as smooth as possible, SEA has a team of dedicated staff to support schools and colleges with examinations administration, including applications for special consideration. And when a candidate has been bereaved within the timeframes permitted, a special consideration tariff is applied to each component of the assessment within each specification the candidate has taken. The tariff will depend on the timing and nature and extent of the bereavement. The tariff will range from 1% to 5% of the available marks for the assessment and include coursework and controlled assessment. For example, if an examination is marked out of 100 and a 5% tariff is awarded, the candidate affected will be awarded an additional 5 marks on top of those that they have achieved in the examination. So 5% is the maximum allowance and is normally reserved for the most exceptional cases such as death of an immediate family member close to the examination. 4% is granted when a member of the immediate family passes away within 6 months or a member of the extended family passes away within 1 month. 3% is granted when a member of the extended family passes away within 4 months, and lesser tariffs may be awarded on a sliding scale depending on the candidate's circumstances. As stated earlier, special consideration cannot take away the difficulty faced by a candidate. If a candidate cannot sit an examination or submit an assessment because of bereavement, their school or college can apply for enhanced grading on their behalf, provided that it is in the examination series they wish to achieve their qualification grade and they have completed at least 25% of the assessment associated with the qualification. It is also important to point out the flexibilities associated with SEA qualifications. Because they are unitised, candidates have more than one opportunity to complete an assessment during the course of study, and in some subjects there is more than one opportunity to do so in each academic year. For example, in GCSE mathematics, English language and single and double award science. Students also have the option to resit an assessment at a later stage. Since the return of public examinations in 2022, approaches taken in other countries and jurisdictions have been reviewed to see if more effective alternatives exist. These approaches involve a range of approaches of different methods, such as deferring examinations and provisions of alternative evidence in various guises. Hong Kong, for example, uses a tariff system similar to the awarding organisations that are part of JCQ, but the supplement doesn't exceed 4% of the total marks available. In terms of effectiveness of the approach used, it is also worth noting that special consideration has been used to support students affected by a number of high-profile incidents in recent years. These include the Grenfell Tower disaster in June 2019, the Manchester Arena bombing in May 2017, and closer to home, the Greenvale Hotel tragedy in Cookstown on St Patrick's Day in 2019, when 3 young people sadly died. To provide an indication of volumes, in summer 2024, SEA received 42,243 applications for special consideration from 8,379 candidates. Of these, 7,225 assessments were related to bereavement. Since the return of public exams in 2022 following the pandemic, we have received applications for special consideration on behalf of 3,162 candidates on the grounds of bereavement, and in all applications we have applied due care and attention to ensure the needs of the candidates are met within the permitted parameters. In terms of support then, all relevant information regarding the special consideration process is signposted on SEA's website to support schools and colleges with the process. Regular reminders to schools are provided in a timely manner through the academic year. Support clinics for examinations officers who administer the process are held at appropriate times, and we engage regularly with school leaders through our principals' briefings. We also understand the examination season can be demanding time for students and their families, and to help with this we provide advice and information geared towards all students' general well-being in the run-up to examinations, which is refreshed each year and promoted on our website and on our social media platforms. More broadly, the statutory curriculum at Key Stage 3 states that students should have opportunities to investigate the influence on physical and emotional and mental personal health. At Key Stage 4, students should be able to develop an understanding of how to maximise and sustain their own health and well-being and reflect on, respond to their developing concept of self, including managing emotions and reactions to ongoing life experiences. And opportunities to do so can be found through the delivery of the Personal Development Unit in GCSE Learning for Life and Work. SEA also has a wellbeing hub developed by our colleagues in the curriculum and assessment team, with resources targeted at both primary and post-primary students. This includes links to Bereaved NI, which is the Northern Ireland Bereavement Network. Their website also has a section aimed specifically at children and young people and includes a range of helpful age-appropriate resources and means of support for them, from providers such as the Foyle Hospice, Bernardo's, the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust and Winston's, which supports children and young people affected by grief. In closing, I hope this briefing has comprehensively set out the special consideration process, the approach adopted by SEA regarding support for students who have experienced bereavement and who are taking examinations and assessment, as well as an insight into the support that we provide for schools and students. Thank you again for your time, and Ronan and I are happy to take questions and take part in further discussion.
Thank you for that very comprehensive overview, Michael. I probably won't focus on the detail around those special considering maybe some of the wider issues that you touched on, and really I think just reflecting the event this morning that Marie Curie ran, where I know there were SEA and departmental representatives at that event. One of the things that came through very clearly was that young people, as on many issues that we deal with in this committee, we're very clear that we want to be listened to on this issue. There was some academic research that was presented where parental surveys were coming back saying we don't think we should really talk about death or dying in schools. It's too sensitive. But the youth surveys, and including really importantly the young people who had been bereaved, were saying we need there to be a space to talk about this in schools. So with that in mind, going back to that sort of special consideration process document, did you have any idea to what extent the views of young people around what they need in the process were taken into account?
Well, I suppose from our perspective, the JCQ special consideration process, and I suppose in various guises, has been in circulation and in use for more than 30 years. There's always an opportunity, I think, for students to sort of feed into these processes, and for us as membership organisations to share those. But in terms of the actual tariff and the approach that we take, I wouldn't be too sure what involvement from youth services and whatnot has been captured in terms of coming to those arrangements. As I say, they have been in use for a number of years, but from our perspective in SEA, we would do an awful lot of work through parents groups, through children's groups, through the likes of Nikki and so on, and I'm more than happy to have more conversations with them if they feel that I suppose their thoughts and views aren't being captured in the processes that we currently apply. I think one of the things about the JCQ process is that there is an awful lot of flexibility within it, and it does take account of an awful lot of different scenarios arising, and I suppose by the end of this briefing I hope that we have given you a good indication of those flexibilities and how we actually approach those different cases that would be presented to us. I think one of the things as well is a lot of the work that we do may appear on the face of it as being slightly bureaucratic for students. It wouldn't be something that they would really engage with, I suppose, until they really have to. Our sort of key relationship is with our schools and colleges. We wouldn't really have an awful lot of engagement with centres in terms of actually applying the process until it's something that they need to, because I suppose from a young person's point of view, they are relatively carefree in their approach, and they don't think that something unfortunate might happen to them. But certainly when it does, we are more than willing to work with them, work with their families, and ensure that whatever outcome is arrived at is one that protects their interests.
Okay, well, I mean, I think probably we'll discuss actions arising from it. I mean, I would probably want to think about whether or not there is maybe a need to widen out, this process for a bit of consultation around with young people, parents as well. I think just to hear whether or not it actually is fit for purpose and it does, properly account for the impact, particularly of bereavement. I'll just ask one other wider question, then I'll open out to members. One of the recommendations coming out of the Marie Curie research was the critical importance of good bereavement policies in schools, and it seems to be there's a pattern where many schools have them. A lot of teachers and staff working in schools may not know that they have them, but they do, and that's no criticism of teachers. It's just that it's often a document, that sits in a folder somewhere in a shelf. There's also lots of evidence of really good practice, and I'd want to highlight Regent House in my own constituency, who were at the event today, who have really delivered some excellent work on a sort of whole school approach to bereavement and the pastoral care around that. How important would you say that good bereavement policies are in a school to ensure that young people are properly equipped when they do experience a bereavement, to minimise the impact of that on their studies as far as possible?
Well, I think I suppose first and foremost, from my perspective, I'll be given a personal view as opposed to I see a view. I do think it is important that, I suppose, being a father of two young children myself, I know it is one of those subjects you don't really like talking to them about, and it is something that does worry them. I think if they have the opportunity within their school or college to talk about it in a safe space, in a caring and responsible way, it can only be a good thing. I think from a SEA perspective, certainly from the awarding organisation side, I think also as well to know that there is support there for them if they do feel, if there is something, if something crops up, if they do experience a bereavement during examinations, to know that there are options for them, and there is a support network there for them. So certainly it wouldn't be something that I would object to, and I'm sure my colleagues would be of exactly the same position as me. That's great. Probably a wider question at departmental level around how we can ensure we've got good bereavement policies in all our schools. But that's grand. I will hand over to the Deputy Chair if you have any questions.
And thanks for your presentation. Domestic, if a pupil experiences a domestic crisis, that can be grounds for special consideration. Could you tell me what your definition is of domestic crisis? Start off with that just. Well,
I think, from our perspective, Pat, we wouldn't try to sort of categorise a domestic crisis. Like every application that we would get in for special consideration, we would consider on its own merits. So, say for example, family breakdown, or an issue has arisen in the home, something has arisen over the weekend that has caused trauma to a candidate. We will ask them to possibly, either the school, to categorise it under domestic crisis, but the actual event itself we will consider it based on the information that is provided to us. All we try to do is give the applicant, the examinations officer or the head of centre, an opportunity to try and categorise what exactly that event is before we'll consider the application. But in terms of what would be presented to us, there could be all manner of issues being shared with us, and applications associated with those.
So you don't have a template of different types of events that might happen. You just judge it on whatever the information is you have at the time.
Well, it could. I'll allow Ronan to come in here in a second, okay. But it could be absolutely anything at all. And as I say, we will always try to work to ensure that the interests of the candidate are protected, no matter what situation is shared with us, or the circumstances of an event that happens in the home.
I suppose the system we have in place to receive a special consideration process, it is simplified and made as efficient as possible. The decision on what a domestic crisis is really best decided between that school and the young person there, who you're working together day and daily. So if they decide it is a domestic crisis, that's how they submit it to us, and it falls under that category for our process and purposes then.
And who then makes the decision about whether it has reached the threshold of eligibility for consideration?
Well, we have a team of specialists in SEA who are very, very experienced at reviewing and evaluating all these applications, Pat, and they will be the ones who will make those decisions.
And just on another issue of long-term illness, long-term illness isn't eligible as grounds for special consideration. Well, why is that?
Long-term illness will be grounds for special consideration if it flares up, for example, gets an awful lot worse during examinations. If there is a long-term illness that's affecting a candidate, we will manage that through the access arrangements and reasonable adjustments process.
But other types of injury or terminal illness or life-threatening illness, you know, are there clear reasons for a pupil reaching this threshold of special consideration? Why is long-term illness not in that category also?
Well, as I say, it's not that we won't consider an application on the basis of long-term illness, but for example, if a candidate has had an illness for 3 or 4 years, is being supported by the school, there are ways of working in place to support that candidate. That will be managed through the access arrangements and reasonable adjustment process. But if, for example, the circumstances associated with the illness get much worse during exams, then we will look at it through the special consideration process and take account of that.
Okay, fair enough. So, I mean, except what you're saying, if a child has suffered an illness for a protracted period of time, but is still able to complete their schoolwork or whatever with special support, fair enough. But if it's, first of all, what is meant by long term? What's the definition of long term?
Well, it could be anything. I would say we would work basically on the assumption of something maybe, say, 6 months or more before the examination, beyond the or before they've actually sat the examination. But
if a pupil was ill for, say, 2 or 3 months prior to an examination,
we wouldn't determine that to be long term, and then we would try and use the special consideration process to support them then.
Right. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Just
David. Yeah.
I mean, to give some light, I mean, I know it's some time has passed since I done examinations and so on, but I think in terms of reasonable adjustment stuff, I would have had sort of chronic post-viral fatigue syndrome at school, or ME, or a few different names sort of floating around attached to similar nowadays, but would have had additional time as and where needed it with exams and so on, so you probably weren't getting marks adjusted in that respect, but you would have had quite considerable consideration given to it. And I imagine that's still the same today in terms of if you have a condition like that that's maybe been going, because that affected me for a number of years. So just you do get that consideration, but just not in the particular way of adjusting grades. Would that be right? Yeah.
So different circumstances or different arrangements can be put in place for different candidates depending on their circumstances. And I think it's fair to say over the last number of years we have seen, I suppose, the number and complexity of the cases that candidates are presenting with as becoming much more challenging, and a range of different arrangements then have to be put in place to support them. But again, we will absolutely work with the school to ensure that their interests are protected, and we're doing what we can to allow them to access the assessments that we make available.
I think it's one area where actually quite often we're looking for consistency in things, but actually this idea of looking at things individually and someone's individual circumstances and how it might affect them differently to other people, I think actually probably has great worth in that, and might bring problems at times, but I think it's definitely the most appropriate approach.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. I've asked if it was possible to bring you here after engaging with a constituent. He's a young man. His mother was diagnosed with cancer, and within 2 weeks, sadly, had passed away. So understandably, it had caused an unbelievable sense of, just complete distress and heartbreak, not only for this young man, but of course his father and siblings. In his words, he felt there was a lack of an efficient understanding from SEN about the crushing feeling of loss and grief, and he felt punished and penalised as a direct result of losing his mother. And there's a quote I'd just like to speak about here today, and that is that the world is divided into the bereaved and the unbereaved. So can I ask the panel what they think it means to be a child who finds themselves on the side of the bereaved? How do you think this might affect their ability to study, to focus and to achieve?
Thanks, Cara, for that, and I'm aware of the case that you speak of, because I know we had some sort of communications back in September about that. I think from our perspective, I think first and foremost, it is awful to hear of a young person having to go through that, and I know that quote that you have referred to, funny enough, I came across it at the weekend when I was preparing for today. From our perspective, I know that the candidate school did apply for special consideration on his behalf, and the 5% tariff was applied, but I haven't experienced going through examinations, having lost somebody very close to me, and from my perspective, I just wish to extend the condolences of myself and my colleagues to the candidate. I think from our perspective, certainly, and I tried to articulate that in the opening statement, the candidate in question has to be commended for sitting his examinations. If it was the case that he wasn't able to, we would have tried to do our best to support him to ensure that he got his qualification grades in the summer. But from our perspective, we are presented in any examination series with a number of tragic cases, and I know, for example, in the summer there were actually 2 pupils who sadly passed away. One just before he got his results and one just after. And I know from working in SEA that the amount of empathy and support that we try to provide to schools to manage every case, we do try to go as far as we possibly can to ensure that those candidates are supported, and we did do the same there. But absolutely appreciate from that young person's perspective, his whole world has been turned upside down by losing his mum, and we have tried to do what we can to support him within the parameters that are there. But certainly, and again, I acknowledged in the opening statement, like, special consideration will only go so far. It can never totally acknowledge the loss or the pain or the disruption that is caused either by a bereavement or an illness or an accident or so on, but we will certainly always have the candidate front and centre of any approach that we take.
Thank you. And just to give the chair comfort, I just have 2 more questions, and I'll be brief. Thank you for your answer. You had alluded there to the awarding of 5%. And when I was going through our pack, and you had referred to in your opening statement, you're led by the joint council consideration process when it comes to setting bereavement policies. Do you know why this figure of 5% was reached, how it was reached, and what data was utilised to get there? Like, why not 7%, for example?
Well, look, I suppose first and foremost, it has been. I suppose it's a tried and tested approach that has been used and it's been in place for nearly 30 years. And from my perspective, and being responsible for implementing and operating the special consideration process, I do think it works relatively well. There are different approaches that are taken across the world. Again, some I alluded to, where that actual tariff isn't applied in some countries, in some jurisdictions. What they will do is ask the candidate to sit the examination again at a later date, which has its drawbacks. Other ones will ask for alternative evidence to be presented again, which has its drawbacks. Whereas I think within the JCQ process, there is a way of recognising bereavement if the candidate sits the exams. But again, from a SEA perspective, we absolutely would not. If a candidate does not feel able to sit the exams, we would not be expecting them to, and I'm sure that their school or college wouldn't be expecting them to either. And if they can't, then we will work to find an alternative way of working within the special consideration process to ensure that their needs are met. Has it been considered
that it could be reassessed
well,
at any point?
Certainly the only other jurisdiction that we were able to come across that has a process similar to that in terms of the tariff was Hong Kong, and it wasn't as generous as the one that's in place for JCQ awarding organisations. So, but certainly I would not be averse to considering the approaches, but certainly and again I have illustrated in there those sort of high-level cases where special consideration has been used in the past, like Grenfell, like what happened at Greenville in 2019 and the Manchester bombing. So it does work, and I think also as well in terms of volumes, the statistics to show the amount of cases that we have tried to manage, and those actually related directly to bereavement. It has gone some way to acknowledging the loss or the grief that those candidates have experienced.
Thank you. And then just lastly, when we talk about the cut-off point of grief, can I ask then, grief is a unique thing. Everybody experiences it differently, and particularly for children, it's just enormous. It completely interrupts their entire being. And we don't want it to interrupt their academic trajectory. Can I ask you just around, how does SEA define a loss? Is it limited to parents, grandparents, to best friends? Are they considered? And then can I ask you off the back of that, because we know grief is fluid, do you really feel 6 months is adequate? And predicted grades were used during COVID. Is that something SEA would consider doing for children who have experienced either a traumatic event or significant loss?
5 questions.
That's it
I know.
me.
Do you know what?
Yeah, sure, I would attempt to Carol, 2 questions. There were about 3 there, but if I could ask, in all seriousness, very
quickly.
If I could just come in, Mike, in all seriousness,
Yeah.
it is a serious subject. But so if I could come in, just ask to be brief, but to cover the question, but we are short on time.
Okay, so very quickly, the 6-month limit is in there, Cara, because it is a high volume process, the number of applications we get. So, but like as I say, and I just want to reassure everybody here today, we absolutely look at every case, particularly a bereavement, on its own merits. So if there is mitigating evidence or support from the school or college on behalf of the candidates, that will absolutely be accepted. But the 6 month is just in there as a bit of a guide, because of the amount of applications we receive. In terms of alternative evidence, we have used that to award grades in the past. For example, I know you have referenced COVID. There is a new process in place where if a candidate isn't able to sit any of their examinations, for example, because of very, very serious illness, there is an alternative awarding process that we can use. And that's particularly the case if they are very, very ill and they can't defer to a future series. So that process does exist within there. And then I think the last one, just on terms of grandparents or close friends or whatever, again, all of that is considered. We wouldn't rule out any particular context or circumstance. Certainly if a candidate has been affected, because it's about them. It's not about the process, it's ultimately about them, and we try to do what we can to protect them.
Thank you, and thank you for being here.
No worries at all.
Thank you, Chair, for being kind.
Michelle had indicated.
One very brief question. I don't think it was in your briefing, and thank you for being here, by the way. That was really helpful and poignant to hear that today. Is there any cost to kids who have to do resits in these circumstances, or do they?
If a student decides to resit an exam, there's a cost with it. But if they have missed an exam because of circumstances arising, there's no cost.
Right, that's okay.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rona, for being here. Just on the way through, in terms of your oral evidence, you mentioned, Michael, a figure of 3,000 something. I didn't quite catch it. Could you just read that one back for us?
Yeah. Where did I find it?
Right towards the end.
With 3,205 students since 2022 that have had a special consideration application made on the grounds of bereavement.
That's exactly right. And just to check from my understanding, of those candidates, I mean, do they all get awarded something? Do some of them get awarded something? How is that? How's that worked out? And you probably don't have the answer to this, but for example, if I sort of asked you, how many of them got some recognition towards special consideration? Do you have anything around that?
I think in the case of all of those applications, obviously haven't got all of their form, but I would imagine that they all got at least something to acknowledge it. And again, it really depends on who it was that passed away. Whether or not it was a mum or dad or brother or sister, maybe it was a close friend or family or an extended family member, and then as well sort of taking into account the time. But I would say that in the vast majority of cases, there would have been some acknowledgement of that. Now, also as well, I think it may not be, some of those candidates may not even have taken the exams. They may actually have got enhanced grading. Mm-hmm. So, but we would just need to look into those numbers. But we're happy to provide a written breakdown for you if you want to.
No, that's fine. It's just more to get a sense of the numbers that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I sort of was then left with just thinking the question: do they all kind of get something, or some of those suppose some of those rejected because they maybe don't meet the
Well,
criteria?
you know, I think that's the thing. I couldn't give you, an
I'm not
assurance of
asking you to,
100%.
no, I
Yeah,
understand.
but absolutely, I would say, a school will only submit an application if there is obviously justification for doing that, and if obviously the evidence has been presented to us, I would imagine they would all have had some acknowledgement.
Thank you,
No
Ron.
worries. Peter.
Just briefly, it's just can I just say from the outset, I don't envy your job because and how you do this, because like we've talked quite a bit about grief and the likes of that, and everybody deals with grief in different ways and it affects people in different ways. It's just to try and get an understanding. So you mentioned there about somebody in the immediate family. Is there more of a waiting then for somebody who's in the immediate family as opposed to somebody who's maybe a close friend or a relative? How on earth do you begin to measure the closeness that person has to somebody in their immediate family or somebody outside? They can be much closer to that person from the outside of their family, if you know what I mean.
I know, and do you know what? You're absolutely right. And again, it's called a guide to the special consideration process. So we try to interpret it again as best we can, because say for example, I'm just even thinking, maybe an aunt or an uncle is living in the same house as a child, and they have been there since they were no age. Like, would that then be interpreted as a member of the immediate family? My view would be that it would be, but these are all certainly judgment calls, and it's all very much based on the evidence that comes from the school. But absolutely, and I just please be in no doubt that all of these applications are looked at on their merit, and it's not the case 6 months, we'll ignore it, 3 months, it doesn't work like that. These are all given very, very careful consideration before a decision is made, and as I say, it is always to err on the side of the candidate where we can.
I appreciate that. And then just, we talked as well about illness here, in terms of mental health and well-being, and maybe children who are, impacted by severe anxiety or something like that. To see a work, is there experts or anything that help you guys in that line in terms of how to deal with that? In terms of the young people themselves? Yeah. Well, I think, from our perspective, what we try to do, and as I said earlier on in the hearing, what we do try to do is ensure that we are linking in with a lot of the student representative groups, so the likes of SSU or Nikki or so on. And I think from our perspective, I think Ronan would support me in this. Since COVID, we have seen an awful lot more children presenting with quite severe mental health issues. Now, where that is something that is longer term, again, we will look at it through the lens of access arrangements and reasonable adjustments to try and support them to do the examination. But again, if it is something that has happened and has flared up during the examination series and they can't take the exam, then we will look at it through the special consideration process. I think one of the other things that we do try to do is provide guidance and support even before those examinations are sat, but also as well in the run-up to results day, because it is a very, very anxious period for a lot of young people. Like that 4, 5, 6 months from, I would say, from March right through to August is very, very difficult. So from our perspective, we try to do what we can to support them and get those messages out, either through the schools or through our social media channels. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Cathy, I've not got any other indications. I just wanted to pick up one thing really quickly that you mentioned there, and maybe that hadn't just been drawn out up to now, just that reference that this is a guide that we're discussing today, so it's not a sort of set of regulations. So the 6 months around the bereavement, there is flexibility there, and I'm not sort of saying let's open a sort of, but each case is taken on its merit if there are particular circumstances that may warrant consideration outside of those date ranges.
Oh, absolutely, and like as I say, the guide is developed, and I think it's important to point out, like, we're relatively small as an awarding organisation, and we've sort of illustrated the kind of the volumes that we're having to manage. With the bigger awarding organisations, it's absolutely massive. So the guide is just there as to try and sort of set some parameters within which decisions are making. But I know from our perspective, and the other thing too is, from because we are relatively small and we're operating in a relatively small jurisdiction, we have such good relationships with all of our schools, with all of our examinations officers. You know, the staff in SEA would nearly know them all on a first name basis. So we will look at every case, as I say, on its merits individually, and ensure that we are doing what we can to protect the candidate. So if it's 6 months and 1 day, you know, we will still consider it and see what we can do to support that child.
I think that's a helpful and important clarification. But no, I've not had any other indications. So thank you for your evidence this afternoon. And we'll probably have a think as a committee if there's anything arising from that. But we appreciate your time, and I think it was very appropriate in Children's Grief Awareness to give to give these issues the attention they deserve. So thank you.
Well, look, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just while the witnesses are making their way out, in terms of any actions arising from that, I've got a couple of things noted, but if there's anything else to add, there was the issue around the extent to which the voice of young people, but I think I would extend that out to parents as well, is factored into this guidance, and whether we maybe could get a bit of detail from SEA, because I don't think that the witnesses were completely clear in the background to that, so I wouldn't mind a wee bit of clarity on that, and whether there is any scope or opportunity for SEA to maybe revisit that, to see if we can get that input. I think from the Deputy Chair's questions, maybe some questions, was there anything around the definitions around long-term illness that you need more clarity on, or were you content
It
with
would
that?
be interesting just to see if there is any sort of proper definition, you know.
So just to see how the long-term illness is defined. And then on the back of Peter's question, I know you'd said you didn't want the information back in writing, but I actually would be useful maybe to see out of that 3,000 odd who did apply, what the proportions are, maybe broken down by what percentage, consideration they got from the 5 down on the sliding scale. So if members are agreed on that, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, I think that summarises it well. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so if those can all be noted. So that moves us on then to the next item on our agenda, which is item 7. And this is an oral briefing from departmental officials. Are the officials here with us? Okay. If we probably do need everybody here. I'll do the sort of usual approach in this scenario. We'll jump to correspondence and see if we can rattle through that, and then as soon as we get a notification that all the witnesses are here, just give me a nod. So if I could ask members just to bear with us, so in the interest of moving through the agenda, if we could just jump to item 9 there, which is correspondence, and if we can have that cleared while we wait for the witness, that would be helpful. So that's pages 173 to 256 of your pack, and then page 9 onwards of table papers, and there's a summary note at page 173. There's not a huge volume of correspondence this week, so this is really just, and I'll just highlight a few that maybe need a committee decision or steer. Other than that, I would propose that we are dealing with this as per the summary note. So item 9.5 in the pack, page 186, it's correspondence from Caleb's Cause NI, and they're seeking a meeting with the committee on post-19 provision for SEN pupils. I don't know if I think some members here were at the Caleb's Cause event in Parliament Buildings this week. I would want to pay tribute again. We've referenced it in this committee to Alma and the work around this campaign, which has been really effectively got the issue of the real gap we have in post-19 provision for SEN pupils, but I think also in a really education specific bit, because I know that maybe feels like it's moving into economy territory, but the transition planning process, there are a lot of questions in education around does it start early enough, is it effective, is health engaged in the right way in that process as well. So I would certainly want to very much confirm my support for accepting that request for a briefing to brief committee, and would propose that we would invite Caleb's Cause to do so, and I would suggest potentially alongside the relevant officials on the 14 to 19 strategy, which is in our forward work plan. So our members agreed on that?
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay. Item 9.6, page 187, is a response from the Department of Education on actions taken following a recent data breach. So that there is information there that members hopefully have had the opportunity to review, and it's confirming that there's an action plan has been developed around data security and data protection guidance. some training around ensuring staff compliance with that, and a process review around data management to prevent a breach recurring. I think this was an incident that arose over the summer, but I would be content, based on the response we've received, to propose we note that. Great. Item 9.7, page 189, is correspondence highlighting a recent report from NIPSO in relation to the failings and breaches of a child's human rights, failure of their care and treatment. And I think we're all familiar with Deirdre Shakespeare and the Harry's Law campaign that relates to. So I would want to suggest, in relation to that item, that we do share that correspondence with the department, seeking the department's views on the issues specifically raised in that NIPSO report. And that's, again, we'll all be aware in relation to the use of restraint in educational settings. I would also want to very much keep the door open that if there is, based on the response comes through, it is deemed that more scrutiny is required, that we would want to keep an open mind around seeking an oral briefing from both the department and NIPSO on that report, and perhaps on the wider issue of restraint and seclusion. It's been a while since we've heard from the department on that. So are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 9.8, and that's in your tabled papers. It's correspondence from the History Teachers Association of Northern Ireland, thanking the committee for its informal briefing and highlighting their concerns. I would want to propose that we note that correspondence. Are members agreed? Agreed. And that's very good timing, as we have that concludes the correspondence item on the agenda, so we can move back to item 7 on our agenda. I'll just let everybody get settled and let members get to the right section of their papers. So, as referenced just a few moments ago, this is an oral briefing from the Department of Education officials around the SEN regulations and the SEN transformation end-to-end review. And I would refer members, there's a bit of material to bear in mind. So we have a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 151, a briefing from the department on the new special educational needs framework at page 153. We have a departmental briefing on the end-to-end review of special educational needs at page 158. And then we have in your tabled papers a leaflet provided by the department on the SEN capital programme. So if members have got all those papers to hand, I will welcome all of the witnesses from the department here today. So I'll let everybody add to the introductions if they want to add anything to their title or if I miss anything, but I'll run through who we have here today. We have with us Janice Scallon, Director of Inclusion at the Department of Education. We have Judy McBride, Head of the Special Education Review Team at the Department of Education. Brenda Shearer, Head of Special Education and Inclusion Policy Team at the Department. Lorraine Brown, Head of Special Education, Early Years and Pupil Support. And Suzanne Kingan, Director for Investment and Infrastructure, and Struhl at the Department of Education. So hope I haven't missed anybody or any aspect of your titles, but you can correct that if needs be. So you're all very welcome here this afternoon. We're delighted to have you here to present on these issues. I've already we've had a brief just sort of reminder for members that this is an evidence session that I think everybody has been anticipating. It's obviously one of the committee's strategic priorities, so I anticipate there'll be a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask again for everybody to try and keep their questions succinct and clear, so that we can. Got some accompaniment there. We can get to the answers to those questions as quickly as possible. But also, if I could ask, in terms of the witnesses presenting, again, to try and keep your answers succinct and to the point. We've read the briefing paper, so we don't really probably need to go over that in huge detail in terms of answers. It's really any new information that we can draw out of that. Also conscious that it's a big panel of witnesses, so if can be taken by the appropriate official rather than 5 answers every time, that would be helpful. And that's really all just said in the interest of moving through the agenda, so we can get to the issues that members want to scrutinise this afternoon. So you'll all be aware, next step really is for an opening statement and opening remarks from yourselves. I would emphasise very strongly up to 10 minutes, and then we will move on to question and answer.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose I have two main items today, which is the new SEN framework, but also an update on the end-to-end review. So it's quite extensive. So I'll try to keep to 10 minutes covering both topics, and then happy to take questions. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to give you an update on the special educational needs regulations and the end-to-end review. A significant amount of work has taken place within the department and is ongoing with partners to ensure that we can deliver tangible improvements across the education system for children with special educational needs. First, I'll cover the SEN framework. As mentioned in your briefing framework, the new SEN framework consists of three main components: the SEN and Disability Act 2016, new draft SEN regulations, and a supporting new statutory code of practice. In June 2021, officials provided the committee with a summary of the main themes emerging from our public consultations on both the new draft SEN regulations and the new draft code of practice. Since then, we've been refining the regulations and working closely with our delivery partners in the Education Authority, Departments of Health and Justice, and with our Departmental Solicitor's Office. Work has also been ongoing regarding readiness for commencement of the remaining sections of the 2016 Act. While Section 2 of the Act has not yet been commenced, the EA, following targeted consultation, published a draft annual plan of arrangements for special education provision in July 2023. The plan sets out how the EA supports educational settings, schools and children and young people with SEN and or disability. Once this section is commenced, the EA will be required to consult on and publish the plan in each academic year. The Department of EA and Department of Health have also been progressing the joint plan as required under Section 4. The joint plan highlights cooperation in relation to identifying, assessing, as well as sharing of information and providing services to children with SEN, including the preparation of transition plans for children who have a statement of special educational needs. The main changes being brought forward by the new SEN regulations have been outlined in your briefing pack. To summarise very quickly, the new framework will bring about improvements to the timescales associated with the statutory assessment and statementing process, specifically to reduce the time available from 26 to 22 weeks. The requirement that each school has a learning support coordinator and every child on the SEN register is to have a personal learning plan. The new rights of appeal following the annual review of a statement and rights of appeal of an EA decision not to make a statement for a child under 2 or about the content of a statement. Introduction of a new independent mediation service, which means that parents or children over compulsory school age can choose to attend mediation before appealing an EA decision to the SEN Tribunal. In refining the new regulations and code of practice, we've taken cognizance of stakeholder feedback, and I want to be clear that the department takes the issue of complying with legislation extremely seriously and is working alongside colleagues to bring about positive changes for children and young people with SEN. The new SEN framework brings forward important and much needed changes to the system and processes which will ensure better outcomes for children and young people. The framework will decrease the bureaucracy of the system, simplify processes, improve cooperation and, most importantly, strengthen the support available to children and young people with SEN. As we approach the final stages in progressing the regulations, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where we must take a fresh look at the new regulations in light of the now draft SEN reform agenda and delivery plan, which I'll come to later. This is an opportunity to ensure that our regulations not only meet current needs, but also align seamlessly with the future proposed direction of travel on SEN transformation. It's therefore crucial that the new framework is considered alongside the draft transformation proposals which have emerged from the end-to-end review of SEN, which I will now turn to. As you're aware, the end-to-end review of SEN commenced in early 2023 in response to a rapidly changing educational landscape, detailed evidence of the range of shortcomings in the system, and ultimately the well and repeatedly evidenced need to improve the experiences and outcomes of our children and young people with SEN. The end-to-end review considered how we equip our workforce with the appropriate tools to meet the increasingly complex diversity of need in the classroom, how we identify additional and alternative support needs and support children as early as possible, how we support parents and carers to navigate the education system while supporting their child or children with SEN, and how we ensure that children with SEN are placed in a timely way in an appropriate setting which can give them the rightful opportunity to thrive in school with the right support. In recent years, there's been an increase in the number of children requiring specialist provision, either in special schools or through specialist provisions in mainstream schools, with the EA confirming that demand for specialist placements was 37% higher in 23-24 than that for 22-23. The Department and the Education Authority continue to work closely to ensure there is sufficient and effective forward planning based on projected need for specialist education provision, which will break the cycle of emergency planning. Since April this year, due to the new strategic approach to capital investment in SEN and with close collaboration between the Department and the Education Authority, over 1,450 new places in both special and mainstream schools were created by the Education Authority in time for September 24, with building works delivered to establish 112 new specialist provision classes in 105 primary schools and post-primary schools, and an additional 67 classrooms in special schools across Northern Ireland. Over 51 million of capital funding has been invested through the SEN capital programme so far this year. I just want to take a minute to put on record my thanks to all schools who supported us in this space and came forward to embrace a more or increasingly inclusive approach to education, giving all children in their locale the opportunity to be educated with their peers in their local community. The review has now reached its conclusion, with each of the 12 in-depth work streams producing a report detailing their findings. This has been collated into a summary report, which will go to the Minister very shortly for consideration with a view to publishing thereafter, subject to ministerial approval. The review has been a thorough exploration of the current landscape of SEN provision, aiming to identify strengths, challenges and opportunities for meaningful change. We've listened closely to the voices of those who experience these issues firsthand. Their insights have been invaluable, and in conjunction with the findings of each workstream has culminated in a series of actions being produced under the themes of right support, right people, right time and right place. This has enabled the Department to draft a SEN reform agenda and accompanying delivery plan that is both responsive and effective. The recommendations from the various scrutiny reports, the engagement and analysis completed through the 12 department-led work streams and our journey towards inclusion have cemented a clear need for a clear policy environment, a focus on the child, a strong, confident workforce with skills to meet children's needs, effective and high-quality early intervention, improved communication and advice for all stakeholders across the system, and appropriate and timely placements in high-quality learning environments. I want to express my gratitude towards everyone who's contributed to this review. Their insights and experiences of schools, parents, children, early years providers, delivery bodies, colleagues in the Department of Education, Health, Economy, Justice and Communities have laid the foundation for transformative change across the system. We're now working closely with our delivery partners to ensure further collaboration and partnership as we move forward into implementation, subject to approval of the reform agenda and delivery plan by Minister. The draft reform agenda is built on the key principles of inclusivity, equity and support, which we believe is underpinned through every child receiving the right support from the right people at the right time and in the right place. There's a strong focus on shifting left, providing intervention at the very earliest point when need is identified. For children in the early years, this means enhancing support for parents, working with health to share information to inform planning for children entering the education system, development of quality bespoke early intervention programmes for children with emerging needs, and supporting the early learning and preschool education sectors to enable them to meet the needs of the children in their settings. For school-age children, where needs present at a later stage, this means enhancing in-school support and reducing over-reliance on external agencies. This requires a truly inclusive education system, a skilled, confident workforce, and also access to adequate resource to enable schools to flex learning environments to meet the needs of all children. External supports, when required, need to be easy to access, and this is being addressed through the Education Authority's new local integrated teams model, as well as harnessing the expertise that sits in the wider sphere with specialist and evidence-based intervention services, and they also need to be quality services delivered by highly skilled and experienced experts in their field. Our draft delivery plan outlines demonstrable steps to help implement these themes, focusing on critical areas such as enhanced training for all adults supporting children with special educational needs in our classrooms, improved collaboration among stakeholders, and greater accessibility to advice and support. The draft SEN reform agenda aligns with the executive priorities set out in the draft programme for government, and in recognising the critical need for improvement, the Minister has emphasised the transformation of the existing education system in respect of supporting children with SEN is a key priority for the Department. We have always said that, as with any transformation agenda, especially where it focuses on outcomes, we can't do this on our own. Therefore, while delivery of the plan will be led by the Department of Education, success of the plan will require significant collaboration and partnership, working with our statutory delivery partners, the community and voluntary sector, those with specific and practitioner expertise, and people with lived experience who require support. As we move forward, our commitment remains clear: to create an environment where every child feels valued, supported and empowered with a sense of belonging in their school and community to enable them to achieve. This reform agenda is not just another review, it represents our collective vision for a better and brighter future for our children with SEN, their families and all those who support them. Thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Janice. I suppose I'll begin really with a simple question, because we've been discussing this issue for a very, very, very long time. Over a decade, considerably over a decade. It has been said on many occasions that, and you've referenced it there, we've enough reviews to probably wallpaper this room, and probably a few more besides, 200 odd recommendations arising out of those. I think we were all hoping today we were going to see an action plan. I know from engagement with the department last year, it was quite clear summer 24 we would have an action plan. It's shifted to autumn 24. The clock is ticking in autumn. When are we going to see a published action plan with clear outcomes, clear targets that we can all look at and understand what is actually going to be done?
So I have a draft reform agenda and delivery plan ready to bring to the Minister imminently, so I can't put a timing on that because it's all subject to Minister's approval. But we did get a very early draft ready towards, it was the end of August, September time, and just to ensure that the direction of travel was the right way to go. Since then, we've been engaging with a number of identified delivery partners for each of the actions outlined in our delivery plan. So we've engaged quite extensively on that, just to make sure that partners know who they are, know what their responsibilities are, and that a plan that we produce is achievable and deliverable. So we've now got to the point where we've got a draft plan ready, but it has to go to the Minister for approval.
I understand, of course, there's that process for the Minister to approve this, and we couldn't be looking at a plan that the Minister hadn't approved, because it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on unless it has that stamp of approval. I suppose my question is, why is it only going to the Minister now? I know this has been a big piece of work, but I think looking at this, those 12 sort of themes that are drawn out, I don't think if we'd discussed this a year ago, 5 years ago, anybody would have been saying anything different. There's a lack of parental confidence in the system. The statementing process is too focused on statementing rather than providing support, that the model of assigning an adult to every child who has additional needs is not always working, that it's difficult to access the support once the needs are identified, that we don't intervene early enough, that there needs to be a focus on early years, that it needs to be more child-centred. I could list them all. I think you'd ask any member around this table, they would have been able to say these are the issues, and we see them every single day in our constituency office every time we visit a school. So there doesn't seem to be anything new there. I appreciate it might be a bit more nuanced. What have we learned that's new that we couldn't have been starting to try and tackle a year ago?
If we take those 200 recommendations that have arisen from the scrutiny reports, one of the most recent recommendations was from the Ipsos review, and that mandated the department to lead a review. So that's what the end-to-end review was. It was brigading those 200 recommendations, which have been there for many years. If we brigade those 200 recommendations into themes, they are all broadly saying the same thing. There's about 30 or 40 recommendations when you boil them all down. And that's what designed the 12 work streams that sit under the end-to-end review. Each of those work streams then were scoped out, and the department, in conjunction with the Education Authority, did an extensive piece of analysis on each of the 12 themes, and that allowed us to hear directly without anyone else being involved in a review. It allowed us to engage with stakeholders and engage directly with children and parents and other potential delivery partners in this space. So that's what the end-to-end review was about. It always had a 12 to 18 month time frame, so we have now brought that to closure. Each of those work streams has a report on the findings of the work streams. I would have to say that yes, the findings are absolutely commensurate, But it was important for the department to hear directly from all stakeholders, and that's what the end-to-end review was about. The findings emerging now have been consolidated into a summary report, and then we have moved into the development of that narrative, that reform agenda, and setting out what we think are the key actions. I think to have moved down a road of 200 recommendations to action actually would have been overly bureaucratic and created a lot of administration.
Agree
so
entirely.
we used the end-to-end
I agree
review
entirely on that
to
point.
consolidate that, to come out with a delivery plan that everyone can understand.
So
and we've spent...
If I could come in, I do agree.
Yeah.
Nobody can transform a system with a 200 recommendation long tick list. Not suggesting that. I suppose for me it was quite striking that the 12 themes were probably 12 themes we could have all agreed on a year ago. So that is just a concern for me, that we're still really no closer, as far as we can tell, to actually understanding what's going to happen. I'm very conscious that parents will be watching this committee today. I know there are parents watching this committee today who were genuinely hoping they were going to hear something today of like, this is what's going to happen. Where the system is going to look like this. This is where the change is going to be delivered, and it is disappointing that we haven't moved forward more quickly. But we await the plan. We await it. But it's certainly not the first time I've said that. we look forward to the plan, and we are still waiting. I'll move on to a separate question, and you referenced it, and I think it's a really, really important one, and that is around health. You referenced a whole range of other partners, but I think health being really critical. Where is the Department of Health on this? Because we absolutely need them. We need them for data sharing, we need them for the provision of allied health professionals, we need them for that early community intervention, we need them for special school nursing provision. You could list where we need health all day long. Are they fully bought in on this? Because you're saying we still need to actually sort of ensure we've got stakeholder buy-in. Are health bought in? Are health going to put any money up for this? Or is this just going to be seen as education's problem to resolve?
No, as I said in my opening remarks, this is not something that education can do by itself. And it already referred to having a draft plan, an early draft of the plan back in August, September time. And we have been engaging with all of the statutory delivery partners and others on the content of that plan. So to rush out with a plan and not have engaged with potential delivery partners, I think would have been presumptuous that delivery partners would be signed up to the plan. So we've engaged extensively with health and others on the content of that plan. I think it's fair to say that we've always said, and in fact, I think the independent review of education outlined that around £136 million per annum would be required to deliver SEN transformation, with 25 million per annum specifically for capital. Our plan would be similar in that direction. So this plan will require significant investment, and we've always said that. We have made a bid to the Transformation Board, as I think the committee's already aware. But the plan will require significant investment, so our colleagues in health are also aware of that.
Was my question was, I
don't
disagree with any of that the funding challenges are significant, without a doubt. The current education budget is not well enough resourced to deliver this. Are health bought in on this in time where I'm talking about pooling resources? I'm talking about jointly commissioning services. I'm not talking about sort of a working group or a reference to it and a strategy. I'm talking about are they bought in to work in partnership to deliver this when the plan emerges?
We have had really good sessions with health, and now that we've got to that, and just for avoidance of doubt, the delivery plan is not another strategy. It is a series of actions,
jointly
and we're
commissioning services, and this
health.
is from both departments. Is that where the departments are at in their interactions on this?
That's for our joint health education oversight group, and that's on the plan for that group, always has been, even outside of this delivery plan. So yes, I mean, talking together how we knit together our services in order to deliver better for children, how we plan for those children, and in particular the services that go into our school. Health also have also got workforce issues in terms of resourcing as well, so it's definitely on the agenda, yes.
I haven't heard anything that reassures me there that joint working is set up and ready to go, and we'll see when the plan comes out. But I mean, I think if health are not just at the table, I think we need to get away from that language of we need everyone around the table. It is about, are these services going to be jointly commissioned, or are you working hand in hand on this, and in terms of that willingness to pool resources, because I mean, health are hugely stretched, no doubt about that. But there's an early intervention piece here that undoubtedly will save money down the line for both education and health systems if we could have the strategic thinking to get at this early. Look, I think other members are almost certainly going to raise funding, so I don't want to go down that route. Last question from me, and if I'll ask it quickly, and if you can just answer it quickly. When the plan arrives, will it have clear targets and outcomes that we can look at to understand how we measure the success of this?
The plan that's going to minister has a clear set of actions, yes, that need to be delivered, and it has a clear timeline.
Will there be something there very clearly for each of those actions that are being taken by which we can measure success?
The plan is accompanied. You'll know that there was a work stream under the end-to-end review around an outcomes framework. So that's in a bigger space, but the plan itself will be accompanied by a very clear monitoring and accountability framework, yes. And the governance is very important around the plan. So we need to have a very clear governance framework, and that's what we're in the middle of putting alongside the delivery plan. But I also didn't want the delivery plan to be a tome of information. I wanted people to be able to understand the delivery plan when they see it, what actions are going to be taken, in partnership with whom, by when, and the governance around that will be really important, and a monitoring and evaluation framework around it, yes.
I do think the accessibility is an important point, because I think parents, and indeed actually education professionals, will say, we don't know this end-to-end review, what is it? It feels very complicated. So I think the action plan needs to be accessible. I would agree on that. Okay, Deputy Chair, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. I just want to follow on from the question the Chair asked around the role that health is playing in all of this. And in your briefing paper it says, the move to local integrated teams is phase 1 of the EA's proposed transformation programme, and further work to develop the model following phase 1 will ensure alignment with health services, development of staff training, and introduction of parent helplines. Would you not agree it makes more sense for the alignment with health to be the first priority? And then we would have an idea, of how many allied health professionals we need, like behavioural therapists, speech and language therapists, and that wraparound support that's required.
I think that's something, Pat, that we've been looking at in terms of pupil support services in the department and with colleagues in health, and we've also been looking at early intervention and the importance of that early intervention, specifically for the local integrated teams model. I mean, the rollout of that model, as we've always said, was about consolidating the individual pupil support services that currently exist in the Education Authority into a team around the child. And that has already started to roll out. So the educational psychology gateway has been removed. There's a single request for referral form, which reduces bureaucracy on schools. And that model will continue to roll out then into local areas where schools can actually be supported by a local team for the current pupil support services. So rather than having to refer 3 times to 3 different services, you refer once into the local integrated team. The plan has always been in the longer term to dovetail that with health, and we know that our colleagues in health are also reworking their models as well based on their information about the number of referrals that they have in the very early years and long before children come into school. So the plan has always been that these 2 models will be worked together, health working on their workforce, education working on their workforce, with a view to dovetailing them later in the day.
Fair enough, but the difficulty in it all, and we have been talking to school principals, is that previously some schools they were called units, or other names had been given to them for children with moderate learning difficulties. And what principals have been explaining to us is that with the pressure on schools to establish specialist provision in mainstream, which are basically for children who should be in special schools, but because of the lack of places in special schools, what's happening is that children with more severe learning difficulties or additional needs are being placed in these SPIMs. The threshold for moderate learning difficulty has been raised, and those kids, for example, children with dyslexia, who would benefit from a year, 2 years, 3 years in what was previously a unit, and then could transfer into mainstream and flourish there, are being directed immediately into mainstream. They're not getting the support they need. So what's happening is they aren't ready for mainstream, they're not flourishing, they don't have the support they need. And on the other hand, those children who go into the specialist provision in mainstream aren't getting the wraparound support that they need or might get in a special school. So we've got a double whammy of none of the children, whether it's moderate or severe additional needs, are suffering as a result of this. So, and this is coming directly from principals. So how would you respond to that?
I think the evidence that I've seen, when the ETI have recently released their report, so we asked ETI to do an evaluation of specialist provisions in mainstream, to have a look at the evidence in terms of what's out there. The feedback that we've had to date, certainly from parents and from principals, is that there's been a huge increase in specialist provisions in mainstream. Previously, they may have been referred to as units or learning support centres. They've been around for decades. This is not new. And actually, the rise in specialist provision in mainstream is in response to the changing profile of children, recognising that those children, and it's not all children that should be in a special school, that's not the evidence that I have. There has been some early years provision set up, specifically for early years foundation in a number of schools where the physical capacity of the local special school has been exhausted, and early years provisions have been set up in those primary schools. We've been to a number of those provisions, and actually they appear to be working very well. SEN Reform also did a survey of their parents, and I think it was over 77% of parents said that they were absolutely contented with the specialist provision in the mainstream school that their child was receiving. And the evidence that I've also had from principals is telling me in some of those early year provisions where technically those children, when they reach the end of that provision, should be going into special school. The schools are feeding back that they want to keep the children because they're thriving so well.
So how many specialist provisions have been set up over the summer?
The 1,450 places made available, I think it was 112 across 105 primary and post-primary schools.
And you tell me the ETI has carried out an evaluation on those?
They've carried out evaluations over provisions that have been set up throughout the last number of years.
I'm talking about the most recent ones that have been set up. Has any evaluation been done on them? Because it's principals who are coming to us to tell us about the difficulties that exist. The scenario that I'm only after painting to you, that children with moderate learning difficulties are being moved into mainstream, and those with more severe needs aren't getting the wraparound support that they need. So, I mean, either there is or there isn't a shortage of that wraparound support. Behavioural therapists, speech and language, occupational therapists, and so on. You know, is there a shortage of that type of support?
So children that are in a special school may or may not have access to allied health professionals. They're not all full-time provisions in special schools, and that's been well rehearsed. Children in specialist provision in mainstream, the same as the children in a mainstream class, will have the same access of provision in terms of community support. So if they've been referred to speech and language, they would attend that in clinic, or they would attend that in community. And we've discussed this extensively with colleagues in health, and that's about looking to the way forward to make sure that all children get the support, that the support is brought to the children as opposed to the children moving toward the support.
That doesn't really answer the question, Janice, of whether there's a shortage of that type of support or not.
There's certainly been an overcapacity in our special schools from a physical point of view, and I think we've worked extensively on the capital and increasing the physical environment in the special schools. The capital programme, I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to come in about the expansion of the special schools estate.
Yeah, surely, Janice. I suppose just to say, Pat, I'm not sure how we would evaluate provision that only opened a couple of weeks ago. You know, we can't evaluate it before it opens.
That's why I was asking.
But Janice is talking about a systematic evaluation over the last number of years of the provision that's been there. And I suppose just to say on the capital side, we are working really hard. I understand the questions about the health professionals, but we accept that there needed to be more investment in specialist provision classes, for example, whereby this year every new class that's opened, we've provided them with a grant of £20,000 for furniture, for equipment, for resources. So the children are getting a really high quality experience. As Janice said, evaluation is there, and we are moving forward in terms of that. In terms of the special school estate as well, we created 67 new classrooms. That estate is at capacity. We have had an emergency situation and we've had to work at pace to make sure that children are placed that in school. So, you know, we've responded to that and responded to it effectively.
I acknowledge all that, Suzanne, and I know the work that has been going on over the last number of months, and I also understand the exponential rise in the number of children presenting with special needs. But the question I'm focused on here is whether there is sufficient support in terms of allied health professionals that are required. You know, we had, for example, a meeting, an informal meeting yesterday with a charity who provides support for deaf children, you know, and the results of what they do are absolutely amazing, you know, and if every child who had special needs, irrespective of what those needs are, were given the proper support, then all those children would have a much better chance in life. And the evidence we're getting is that there isn't enough of that support, and that's the issue that I'm raising here today.
In terms
just ask to finish very briefly, and then we'll move on to the next member.
So as Suzanne has mentioned, so there's that additional support from a capital point of view, but the Education Authority have set up the specialist setting support team. So that includes specific support around moderate learning difficulty. It includes specific support, and it is a joined up team. Moderate learning difficulty, language and communication, behavioural support, support for autistic children, and literacy support. So there's a lot of people in that team that are out and they're engaged with each of those specialist provisions, especially the newly set up specialist provisions, and they have tailored support for a full year from that team. So there is language and communication services in there, there is behaviour support in there, there is literacy support in there, there's support for autistic children in there, and the specialist provisions themselves are not classified as units, they are not classified as MLD. There is no score to get into the unit or not. It's based on the holistic needs of the child. So if it's deemed that that child could not necessarily cope all the time in a mainstream class and need a smaller, it's basically small group teaching. I think you'd said that before at a committee, Suzanne. It's basically small group teaching, which has been around in the education system for years, and it's taken those children out of that really busy environment. For some children, sensory overload is actively blocking their learning, and taking them into a smaller environment and reducing that sensory overload on their 8 senses. It's not just the 5 senses that we're all used to. It's proprioceptive, interoceptive and vestibular senses that can be overstimulating a child, leading to a self-regulation response, which can appear as though behaviour. So putting them in a smaller provision in a calmer environment with the appropriate supports from the specialist set and support team is what's more conducive to that child's learning. And many children, many parents have come back to say that their children are thriving in those units, and actually we have parents changing their views on a statement that has maybe nominated a special school for their child and actually wanting their child to go in to a specialist provision in a mainstream school because they can see other children thriving in that space.
Yeah. Just to close, because I'm really concerned time's going to beat us and I want to give all members a chance. I'm sure the subject of specialist provision in mainstream will come up so we can revisit it. So I'm just further, I'm going to have to stick probably to 5 minutes pretty clearly here from here on in. Danny, if you're...
Yep, I'll ask some questions quickly. Thank you, and thank you for coming in. Just the very first one, just follow on from the chair. Why is it not with the Minister right now? Plan.
He had a very early draft of a high level plan just to ensure that he was content with the direction of travel.
You're finished with it's imminently going to them?
Yes.
Why is it not with him now though?
Because we're still refining the details of the plan, and we have an end-to-end review summary and the reform agenda and the plan and a comms and engagement plan.
No, I appreciate that, because every time we ask questions
framework,
it's referred to the end-to-end review and it's getting a bit frustrating.
No, the delivery plan is going to the Minister.
Okay,
yes,
thank you. Because that's where we'll get our timelines and actions. How many children with special educational needs right now who were placed this year are still sitting at home?
The latest figures that we have from the Education Authority were on the 18th of November, 34, Lorraine, is that right?
Yeah,
and they're
not just 34 who have been placed though.
Yes.
Are still sitting at home though. Not ones that haven't got a place, ones that have been placed but aren't in. It's only it's a 34. Okay, so what support are they getting right now then to make up for their hours being missed?
Well, the EA have confirmed that they've all got contingency arrangements in place, and that will differ according to the school. For some of those children, that will be the ability to attend on a part-time basis in school. For others, it will be support at home via the school and access to play and stays and that kind of thing.
Glad you mentioned that play and stay. So we've had about 12 weeks of school. Kids average, 5 hours a day? So we're talking kids have had, mainstream children have had over 300 hours of schooling since we got back, 360. Stay and play. I have constituents where children have had 30 minutes in total. How's that acceptable? What are we doing about it?
Have they had other
Nope.
provision in addition to stay and play? Because our information from the Education Authority, who are legally
sitting at home
responsible for the provision,
with no support.
There's teachers gone out to their homes, so they have what we would normally refer to as exceptional teaching arrangements. That specialist setting support team is also working with those children. Some children are coming into school actually. So if it's a nursery child, if there's a nursery session in the morning, those children are able to come in and avail of that then in the afternoon as well. But I'm happy to, if you want to write to us on that, and we'll follow that one up with the Education Authority.
They should be in P1 and they've had 30 minutes.
I suppose from a capital point of view, just to say, like we accept that, you know, it's not satisfactory for any child not to be in school. Of course it's none. But what we've had to do in capital terms, you know, has been absolutely and utterly immense. We've put, you know, close to 200 classrooms across an estate where you're talking about in urban areas. There's no sites, there's no space. We've exhausted so much of the surplus capacity in the estate. We've had to move ahead in advance of planning permission of them. We've had to do emergency rental of mobiles. The mobile market is absolutely saturated. We get to a stage where there's actually no mobiles to be got. We have moved heaven and earth to get 1,450 children placed who needed a change plan, plus all the other children. You know, it is exceptionally.
Can I really quickly here? Because I think just on that point, no, I'll give you the time you need. I mean, I think that there's no doubt that there's been a monumental effort made in this space. Nobody will argue with that. But if we hadn't been working on a crisis footing, we shouldn't have been having to do this. And I think this is the frustration, is how long we've been in a cycle of the system not functioning. I just want to make that point. I want to go back to Danny, but
and
I think it's important to give both sides of that coin. One is that if you operate in a crisis footing, you have to move heaven and earth to deliver basic services, and that shouldn't be where we are. But I want to make that point and pass it back to Danny.
Part of the reason we are in a crisis, Chair, is because there's been an exponential rise in need that wasn't anticipated and wasn't set out in the planning figures. So to be fair, we're not in a crisis because of inaction on the part of the department or the Education Authority. We're facing an unprecedented situation and difficulty.
Well, I mean, just from the report says there needs to be a shift to strategic area planning for special provision, which suggests there hasn't been up to now.
Absolutely. So in the previous
there hasn't been strategic planning for placements, hence we're in this scenario, coupled with the rise in placements. I just think that context is important, but I do want to give Danny his time.
Can I address that a wee second? So we've always said that the planning for placements has always been when the need, so it's based on child is identified, the SARS team, the statementing team identify that need in terms of where the child lives, where its nearest suitable school is, and where that child needs to be placed. That has worked well in previous years, coupled with, as I've said, COVID that came in, so some of those children actually presented in our classrooms, never having seen anyone who identified a difference in that child that needed additional support. So that happened in 2020 and 2021, and that's where the exponential rise came from. This has not been an exponential rise for 10, 15 years. It hasn't been. It happened since 2020. So the planning up to that point had been there based on the figures that were there and based on the children that were presenting. We had an unprecedented rise in 2020 and 2021, and since, when children who were born during the COVID period walked into preschool at the age of 3 and had never seen anyone, and the need was presenting right there in the classroom, and they then needed to be assessed to have their needs met. So In terms of moving forward, what I mean around
strategic
strategic planning moving forward is that planning now needs to be based on the projections that we have. Projections are only as good as the figures that went before and at the time. So we now have better projections that we can put against.
I disagree actually, and you're saying that this just happened from 2020. This was long before that, and I suppose it goes back to the point what Pat was making. If health and education was working in tangent from the very beginning of early interventions, we wouldn't be in the place that we are today. And just that leads me on to then going to what we talked about before, and I asked this question about, is there an inclusion policy going to be drafted in this?
Yes, I said we're working on that.
But again, working until when? Because that was your answer to me last time, and so
we're working collectively with the European Agency for Special Educational Needs and Inclusion. So I'm the representative board member on that. That's working with 36 jurisdictions across 31 countries who are all at different stages on their journey to inclusion. So there's a much bigger framework going on out there, and we have a real opportunity through membership of that agency to learn from other countries who they themselves would have been at the other end of inclusion, where they would say they have fully inclusive schools and they have a lot to teach us in that space about lessons learned, what to do, what not to do. We are developing our policy framework in tandem with
early
that.
Stage. Any sense of when that will be completed? Or
I don't have a timeline for that. I've been focused on getting the
delivery
plan and reform agenda.
I don't have a timeline for that one as well. So my last question, thank you, Chair. So we've got lots of things we're still going to have to wait on. Is the Minister and yourselves, the department, going to be considering ending supernumerary and moving towards that? I call it a SEN first approach, but again, this is not part of the placement.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I suppose just to say in capital terms, we've already moved away from treating the children as supernumerary. We now incorporate all the children with statements as part of the overall enrolment for all our capital projects. So that's actually a very tangible thing that we've already done in terms of the supernumerary position.
Because that's good, because I think it's so unfair that it's children with special educational needs that are sitting here. And with, again, as I said, the hours, we can look into that there, but mainstream children have done nearly 360 hours of schooling already this term, and there's kids doing 30 minutes sitting at home.
I'm more than happy to come back to you on it, Danny, of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Danny. So Michelle, you were next.
Sure. Thank you for coming today. As eagerly awaited as this briefing has been by us as members, you can imagine how eagerly awaited it is from the parents and the schools. They're watching this today, and I think, like us, they're probably going to be somewhat disappointed that we're not discussing something more substantive here in terms of what's happening next and how this. I mean, I spoke to someone today whose question for you, the key question was, what difference will this review make to children, parents and schools, and when? And I don't think I can answer, or you can answer that question today. And that's the core question that they want to know. And they feel like they've waited long enough to get those answers. So I think it's fair as members that we reflect that frustration and how we're asking questions and how this briefing is going. And I don't think that we're trying to be rude, but just need to reflect how much this is impacting on people's lives and those families who are sitting watching this, because all of us can ask all the questions we want, but they're living this experience. And I just think it's really important that that is said and understood as we go through this. In terms of the delivery plan that we'll see at some point, we need to understand the funding for that. You've put in a bid, as you've mentioned already, to the transformation, the interim transformation board for 100 million. What kind of detail did they get in terms of the support for that bid that we don't have here today? I'm assuming there was a plan that went along with the proposal to get it to stage 3 from the interim board, that you would have to have provided some detail to them about how that is going to deliver the savings that you project. So what level of detail do they have, and why are we not getting that level of detail?
So we rewrote it. It was a template that came through to us from the transformation board, so we were able to outline the work that we've done to date, the context, the priorities that have been there, but also then to outline a series of actions that we would propose to take. I should say that the stage 1 bid, I think you mentioned 100 million. So the feedback on that, we had to scale that bid back because the whole transformation board, it was unrealistic for us to have swept up 100 million of that. So that had to be realigned and repurposed. But the actions that are in there are things that we've already said, things around more flexible support in the classroom, early intervention, measures that we can take in order to shift things left, looking at the assistant, the flexibility of school leaders around the provision of support in their classroom, rather than the constant end goal of getting a one-to-one assistant for every single child with a statement. So there's things like that in that bid. And we've also laid out extensive information around the spend and the trajectory of spend on special educational needs, which is now sitting at £623 million. So we've laid out clearly for the Transformation Board that transformation is necessary and unavoidable now. So it's not, we haven't given our delivery plan because that's much bigger. This is just a tangential bid at this stage that we think is good seed funding that will be able to get us to lift the early actions out of our delivery plan and get them up and running quite quickly.
How this amount of money, if you're successful, interacts with what you need to actually deliver the plan. Is it a funded plan? Do you have the resources in place? Are families going to get another piece of paper that aspires to something that isn't actually funded to be delivered?
So some of that transformation bid will be essential. I mean, getting that funding is essential. We've always said, I think across the department, that education has been underfunded, even more so for special educational needs, coupled with that exponential rise in need out there. So the plan itself is a plan of action. Those actions for the Transformation Board have been costed out, which give us the money that we've bid for in the Transformation Board and sets that out in a timeline with a clear series of actions. Those actions, we think, are the actions that will make real change, really necessary change on the ground that people will see and feel, rather than be something that's going on in the background. But they definitely are the start of the delivery plan, getting out of the starting blocks for that transformation. But the whole delivery plan, do we have any funding for it? No.
But we've no guarantee of the transformation funding either.
I haven't heard anything back from the Transformation Board as yet.
Yeah. And like the purpose of these questions is, I mean, I think I probably speak for everybody here when we say we want to help you get this money. Like, we want to be able to advocate to get the funding that is needed for this. So that bit about transparency and understanding the extent of the money that's needed, etc., it's just information that's helpful to us to help you. And it's just disappointing to have so little detail, especially around how we're going to do it and how we're going to fund it. You also used a figure of 136 million per annum is needed for this.
That's what the Independent Review of Education estimated would be needed to transform the system for special educational needs. That's what the Independent Review put that figure out there, and 25 million a year for capital.
Which was very shy on the capital. Our estimates on the capital now would be that we need £1 billion over 10 years. So we need probably 100 million for SEN capital investment as well over the next decade to transform the estate. We need up to 8 new special schools. We need a significant number of our special schools need refurbished and extended, as Janice referred to earlier. Many of the specialist accommodation in our special schools has been repurposed. We need to look at that and look how that space is being used. We need to continue to invest in specialist provisions in mainstream, and we need to continue around maintenance, equipment, furniture, everything like that. So it's huge levels of investment. I suppose just to give you a feel of that, one new special school potentially can cost 50, 60, 70 million pounds. That's the sort of figures that we're dealing with, and we need significant investment to fund that, both for current and capital.
Yeah. I mean, the numbers are enormous, and we understand that. The numbers that have been spent already, though, are quite significant too. If we look at something around SPIMS, I think the figure we got from a written question was 221 million has been spent on that since 2021. How is value for money being measured from that investment? And by value, I mean, how are we measuring that against the department's core vision of happy learning and succeeding kids? Because I think I reflect Pat's comments that the feedback that we're getting is that people feel those are being used to keep statistics down rather than really deliver the education that those kids need, or education that's appropriate. The kind of feedback we're getting from schools is that schools that were for moderate learning disabilities now have kids with real challenging behaviour they don't know how to deal with. Kids aren't being put in the right place with the right support to get the right education to thrive. they're just being put in a place so they have a place.
Need to get to answer here quickly, so to the
so just in terms
officials,
of then, if our objective is that they're happy learning and succeeding, and we've spent that amount of money putting them in places, do we feel that there has been value for money and that money's been well spent?
So we've had quite a lot of financial analysis on the spend, not just on specialist provision spend, but certainly where we see the biggest rise is actually not in specialist provisions or in special schools. Where they see the biggest rise is actually the support that is given to children in a mainstream class. That is the trajectory on the spend. It's huge, the exponential rise in supporting children in a mainstream class, and that's because more and more parents see the need that a statement is the only way to get support for their child, and when they get that support, it tends to be a one-to-one classroom assistant that comes with that child. So the whole plan is around shifting all of that left, so parents don't feel the need to go for a statement because the support is actually provided where it's needed, whether that be in a mainstream class or in a specialist provision. And actually the targeted support that's given in a specialist provision, if you think about it, you could have 8 children in a specialist provision, 8 autistic children in a specialist provision. Those 8 children would be in that mainstream class, probably with ours or a one-to-one assistant in the mainstream class. And what I hear back from schools repeatedly is we cannot manage a classroom with 32, 33, 34 children and 5 or 6 adults in addition to the teacher in the classroom. That's not conducive for children's learning. So the value for money assessment that was done around the whole continuum of provision that we have is that a child in a mainstream class, actually there's more money spent there than in a specialist provision, but that the specialist provision is yielding better outcomes for those children. So we've also tied in the outcomes for children with statements. If your child has a statement of special educational needs, its outcomes are not as good as other children on the SEN register. So there's been a lot of assessment done in this space when crafting this plan. We didn't just sit down and write a delivery plan. We've worked extensively for 12 to 18 months to put the evidence underneath the plan as well.
I know there is so much to cover, and I know it's not easy for members or witnesses to get through all of the material. We are at real risk of time beating us, so I really don't want that to happen. So Cathy, you're next.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming in today. I want to start off by saying I think it's important to caveat, because what I ask here, that nobody is doubting that you are under immense pressure. Nobody is doubting that there's a shocking amount of work going on to try and come to try and sort this out. But when we're reading this report and everything that you've said, Janice, so far, it all sounds wonderful. But the reality is that I sitting here find it very difficult to see how this time next year we're not going to be sitting here in the same situation with 34 children still not at school, or whatever the figure was. And it's difficult to see how this actually translates into reality. Now, I understand that we don't have all the details today, and maybe when we do get them, but there are groups that will be sitting out there today going, how is this going to impact on us? One such group is going to be around Irish medium and Irish medium schools. So in terms of the future arrangements for the provision of SEN in Irish medium, because I know there is particular difficulties there, has the department done anything to date, or have they instructed the EA to put specific support mechanisms in place for these guys? What's that going to look like for Irish medium? And, you know, in terms of these local integrated teams, how is that going to meet the specific needs of those children in Irish medium?
Throughout the whole of the end, and I have to go back to the end-to-end review because that's the work that we have been doing over the last 12 to 18 months. We've engaged extensively with the sector. We've been out to a lot of Irish medium schools right across the board, talking to them about the difficulties that they're facing, the challenges that they're facing, and there's a long list of challenges faced there, so we're well over what the challenges are, Cathy. And we've had the Irish medium sector have come into both practitioners and the support body. Carmel Gael Scoiliachta have been into our programme board. I have met regularly with SENG, and I have one member of staff looking specifically at all of those 12 work streams, all of the findings that we have, all of the actions that we have in our delivery plan through that lens, to make sure that whatever actions we're taking, we're also very cognizant of the specific differences. There are some challenges faced in Irish medium settings that are no different to challenges faced elsewhere, and there's some very bespoke challenges. So we have a specific working group set up now with the Education Authority looking at particularly at that plan. What is the plan moving forward? What is the support that could be provided to the sector? Recognising that things like linguistics and phonics are different.
Yeah.
And it's not just a matter of translating Satpin, for example, into Irish. That doesn't work because the phonics themselves wouldn't work. So we're working extensively with the sector on that, and I can give you that assurance that we are, and I hope that the sector would reflect that.
So there is an assurance that, because there is sometimes a feeling that Irish medium would be an add-on to things that are happening. So this is work that's happening now alongside everything that's happening, and we should see the outworkings of this with this plan. That's coming. Okay, something I want to pick up on that you mentioned with Pat, and I have no doubt that there are parents out there that are saying that SPIMs are working really well for their children, because I know parents or principals and teachers who are going above and beyond to make sure that they're working in their schools. But you mentioned, and I specifically want to ask around the SENCOs, because you mentioned there, and I just wrote down that gateway that's been removed in terms of the educational psychologist referral. Mm-hmm. Is it not the case that there just wasn't enough educational psychologists, so you just removed that?
I think the recognition is there that was providing a bottleneck. So
because there wasn't enough educational psychologists?
Well, it's down to the amount of time that educational psychologists, I mean, the educational psychologists are there. I think there's 130 now, full-time equivalent educational psychologists. We've also funded more through the DCAP programme, and the number has gone up every year. So it's akin to what it was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's what the educational psychologists are spending their time on. They're spending their time on statutory assessments. And providing a gateway to services, which is not a conducive use of an educational psychologist's time. Yes, they will still have to spend time on statutory assessments because that's their role, but they also have a role to actually support children in school. So removing that gateway serves 2 functions. 1, reduces bureaucracy on the school. 2, reduces waiting list, most importantly, for the children, that they actually get through. They don't have to wait on a gateway of an ed psych to tell them you need literacy support, or you need behaviour support, or you need autism support from the Autism Intervention Service. So removing the gateway is a child-centred approach as opposed to saving someone else time, and actually it also then frees up that bottleneck for educational psychologists for them to spend time supporting children in the role. So
okay, and I can see how in theory that would work. The feedback that we're getting specifically from SENCOs is that this is now just completely shifted onto them. They're now having to spend their time doing this. And I might be wrong in saying, but a lot of SENCOs are still teachers as well on top of this, and now this pressure is being put onto them alone.
They would still have to make the referral, whether they're making a referral through a single gateway or whether they're making, well, actually they don't have to make multiple referrals anymore, so that'll have reduced that workload. They also don't have to make a referral to an ed psych to wait for a response. That's reduced that workload. They're able to refer directly in, single request for referral. So I'm not sure actually how that's creating
now have to do what the educational psychologist was in to do, because that's the feedback that we're getting from SENCOs.
Well, I'm happy to look into that, Kathy, but I'm struggling to understand why, because the referral would still have to be made for the child by the school.
So then what was the educational psychologist in to do if the SENCO was already making that referral?
So the referral in, so the needs noticed, whether the child's in a mainstream class or whether the child's in a specialist provision, need is noticed in the classroom, and all teachers are teachers of children with special educational needs, so they should be able to identify need. And yes, our plan supports them more to do that, but once the need is identified, then that has to go in through a referral. Previously, that could have been 3 or 4 separate referrals, all in through an educational psychologist, who then has to triage that, work out what service is best and get it onto the right service. So that gateway has been removed and they can refer directly into the services. The administration is the same, but there's less of it.
So is the responsibility now going on to the SENCO to make those 3 or 4 referrals that the educational psychologist would have referral?
They'd only be making, for one child, if there was 3 different support mechanisms needed, they would have had to make 3 or 4 referrals. Now for that child, they make 1 referral, and there's no waiting time. There's no going through an educational psychologist to get support in for the child. It goes straight to the service that would provide the support.
Well, look, there seems to be some sort of miscommunication or something. Maybe there is an issue that that you're not, because we are getting that feedback from SENCOs that with the removal of this, that if there had been enough educational psychologists to provide that support, it would have been fine, but this is now being pushed on to SENCOs in schools.
Way to take that one away, Kathy, and have a look at it. I'd be keen to know who it's been reported so that I can speak to them, to be honest, because we're not getting that feedback from schools.
Okay. Well, I was going to sneak another one in there while you were talking.
No chance of that whatsoever. David, you're next.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for your answer so far and for all the work of yourselves and your teams. I think, as said, I think it's a sensitive issue for everyone, and we're all dealing with it. But you're have your shoulders to the wheel in that regard. So thank you for that. Just most of it, I want to put on record just at the start, and it'll not be too big a preamble, Chair, but a lot of the first questions I was going to ask have been taken, but I share the concern around that's been raised by the Chair and Deputy Chair around the cooperation between health and education, and I think a lot of us share the scepticism, and unfortunately I think you're being held to account for scepticism we have probably more towards health colleagues, and I think on that basis, Chair, that it'd be worthwhile us having a session with relevant health officials probably on the other end of this being published. I think that's probably... And
I think that there's a concurrent committee planned on SEN issues, so that feels like the opportunity to do that. So
I think just acknowledge that. I think also the Minister will be very keen to learn that Alliance plan to advocate for the money at this, and hopefully that follows through to Executive. But I will just move on to two questions that I have. One is the in terms of workforce, one of the issues I'd heard in terms of going out and visiting SEN schools had been that struggle to access sub-teachers whenever they needed them and support in that direction. We talked in this committee previously about the need to have maybe some element of SEN training as part of the core mandatory training. Is there any plans for that coming forward?
There's a full theme in the delivery plan that's around specifically workforce development, and not just for teaching staff but for all support staff in schools as well, looking at initial teacher education right through to early career development and teacher professional learning as well. So yes, the short answer to your question is yes, we know that investment's needed, and we also have to bear in mind there's been a period of action short of strike as well, where teachers and not necessarily have been able to engage in training, but the plan certainly looks at what is the profile of the training available. Is it good training? If not, it needs to be higher quality training, but not just pulling in training resources from Education Authority, but also from other expert organisations that we can lever in to assist. So yes, from initial teacher education, we've been working with the higher education
There'll be some element of it, because I think for some of them it was about, you'll know this, but for some of them it was about demystifying and taking away the fear almost of going into an environment they hadn't been used to. So having that bit of experience across the board for every teacher that's been trained sort of just makes that more likely to smooth up for them.
And not just the teachers, but also for the support staff at schools as well, who they have no professional development opportunities. So it's building that in a good framework for them and a career pathway and things like that.
And the second question, like I say, a lot of them already taken, but maybe goes outside the remit of this. I don't know whether it sort of would be included or not. But we talked earlier about the transition piece for post-19 with economy. What work is being undertaken in that? We were, a lot of us, I'm sure, at the Caleb's Cause event a couple of nights ago, and obviously that's brought that to the fore. Just a bit of commentary on that, if you will, in terms of what the department's doing around that.
So, and Julie can come in, I'll pass to her in a second. I mean, you'll know that was a theme, that was a work stream within the end-to-end review. So we have a working group, which is co-chaired by ourselves in the Department of the Economy, but it has input from other departments as well. And that working group will continue. We're not going to close down that work, because that needs to continue under the implementation of the delivery plan. So, you know, the delivery, I need to say that the delivery plan's not a one and done. You know, it's not a list of actions and we're going to stick to those by hook or by crook and get them delivered whether they're needed or not. We have a change in pupil profile, and our pressures will change as we go through the system. So we know the rise in special educational needs very much in the early years now. That's going to make its way through our system. So that transition planning is very clear in the delivery plan around that working together and the actions that we need to take to ensure that children at any stage where they're leaving the education system, that they have a clear pathway to go into, whether that's into It could be into care services, it could be into work, it could be into training, it could be into further and or higher education. So you'll appreciate there's quite a collaborative piece in there with a number of delivery partners identified in order to ensure that those pathways are available.
Yes, and one of the questions Alma has put to us is, about that going to be joint working on. Do we support that joint working and recognise that there's a number of departments need to be involved? And I think we're hearing from the Department of Education, we do. Economy is the lead department post-19, but that there's pieces to be done by many.
I think this is actually one of the really good examples of collaborative working across government, because it is department communities, it's health, it's economy.
Yes.
And we are, when we go out to visit schools or we go out to visit provisions, because we're not always sure what provision is out there for children when they're transitioning into education. So again, we're doing those joint visits to try and understand and pull together maybe a list of provisions that are available. So it is definitely truly joint working.
I'd say I visited Larch not long ago up in the Castlereagh Hills, and again, probably while it leans into the economy piece, I have to say was very impressed and really eye-opening for me in that sense. And we know 4G and some of other provisions in my own constituency as well. So absolutely.
Thank you. Sure. Karen here.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here. Just to follow on there from actually some of Kathy's important points just around Irish medium education. I note that while there was consultation with Irish medium education throughout the end-to-end review, they felt extremely disappointed that there was no mention of IME and its subsequent findings. They've participated with yourselves in the transformation programme since its inception in 2021, but many feel really concerned that they haven't been listened to. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they feel that way?
Well, we haven't published the findings of the end-to-end review yet, so I'm a wee bit confused as to how they feel they haven't been reflected in the findings, because we haven't actually published them yet.
They feel the level of consultation with regards to the end-to-end review, maybe I misspoke there, they feel it hasn't been extensive enough to appreciate the needs of IME. Would you agree? Do you know why?
I've already answered that. I mean, we have engaged right throughout the last 12 to 18 months with the sector. I mean, I have met with Carmela Gael Scully-Octa. I've been to a series of Irish medium schools. We've had practitioners from Irish medium schools into the programme board to outline all of the challenges they're facing. I know that my teams, and I think there was a desire to have a specific work stream in Irish medium, but actually we've looked at that through all of the work streams that we have. So I know, Lorraine, you and your team have gone out specifically on early years, specifically on early intervention, pupil support services. So I think we have engaged extensively with the sector. If there's an issue that I need to be aware of, I'm more than happy to discuss that outside the meeting if you want to contact me.
You're content so far with the level and the depth of consultation? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just moving on then, just around the point of educational psychologists, and I just thought I'd touch on a real life case that's based in the Northwest. I was speaking with a mother. Basically, her son, the school that her son was in is a mainstream school, but they felt it wasn't meeting his needs. He was greatly distressed and his academic outcomes were going downhill. They identified a place in Ardnashee Special School in Derry. The school was identified. They're happy to take him on, but he was informed by the Education Authority that it would take up to 2 years potentially to meet an educational psychologist. Therefore, until he has that assessment by an educational psychologist, he cannot take this place up in Ardnashee Special School. But where the problem lies is in 1 to 2 years he'll actually have aged out of school. So I'm just wondering, is that something you have come across? Because currently this young man is waiting at home without a school placement that's fit for purpose. Is that something you've identified before? Is there many children in the same position, and what can be done to rectify it?
Well, I haven't heard of the 2 years. I know it. I spoke to the Ardnashee principal as of the 18th, and all placements to that date have been sorted. Okay. So if it's been identified on the statement as Ardnashee, they're in school.
Perhaps if it's an individual case, maybe that
we could take that outside.
This is really recent, so maybe perhaps.
Well, I say the 18th, as of the 18th, I did speak to the principal of Ardnashee.
And this month?
The 18th of November.
Okay, well, I've spoken with this. Okay.
So if you want to speak to me outside and you can give me the name, I can follow it up.
That's the best way to
I can get the name. No, that's it for me. It was just around the educational psychology point and then Irish medium education, and I'll follow up with yourselves just around the key points about consultation. Thank you.
Okay.
Peter.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much for coming. And certainly the committee has recognise that there's a lot of work going on in this area. It's a really important area. We have some very amazing special needs kids in Northern Ireland, and I suppose it's about trying to get the best that we can for them. I guess the context of my question is really looking forward to 24-25 and preparation for 24-25. Certainly from the evidence you've given, there's been a significant rise in terms of the number of kids getting statements and a lot of pressure in that area. So I suppose my first question really was, looking to 24-25 next year, kind of where are we and what are the preparations for that?
Okay. I don't want to correct to say 25-26 is next year, Peter, but okay, we're in 24-25.
You're right.
We're actually in 24-25. But for September,
next year.
September, I understand. So, I mean, you'll know that I can't dress that up. It has been really challenging and difficult, right? But I do think that there's been a huge amount of work put in, both jointly actually between ourselves, Capital, the Education Authority, to try and get this onto a more strategic footing year on year. There's still, the operational plan that's under the strategic area plan still needs to be released. I know that we've asked for master plan for every special school. Suzanne can come in more on the Capital side, but in terms of that engagement piece, we still need more provision in our schools, and it is getting to the point where physical capacity year on year is becoming more and more exhausted. But we still have a number of schools, to refer back to the survey that was done last year. We still have a number of schools that are very much in that willing space, very much want to stand up provision, very much want to take more children or new children into a new specialist provision. So EA, I think the latest figures I have, that they've been engaging with 250 schools up to this point, and that engagement will continue. And if need be, if the department need to join up on that moving forward, because it is an operational matter for EA, but if the department need to join up on that moving forward, we absolutely will, in the same vein that we did last year. But I think we're a bit further forward now than we were at this point last year.
And I would just say, from the Capital perspective, Peter, 2 points. One is, the Capital planning for next September's already started. We are on the front foot, and we're a number of weeks ahead of where we would have been in the process this time last year, and several months ahead of where we would have been 2 years ago. So we are getting things on the front foot in terms of the Capital planning. That's not to say it's not a challenge, because if you think about our special school estate, we've exhausted a lot of the estate, we've sweated it, we've put extra classrooms on, we're having to open a lot of dual campus provision, and that requires sites, it requires bigger, more extensive works than just temporary provision, reconnecting to the water, to the mains, all that. So it's not to underestimate the challenges that lay ahead. Having said that, we are on the front foot and moving forward, and the challenge for us is how we move from what was described earlier as an emergency state of planning to really getting onto the front foot in terms of planning for provision, and the Minister's SEN Capital programme is the way that we're trying to do that, because we're planning strategically to really increase the footprint of our special schools in terms of the places, in terms of new special school provision, in terms of extension. We're trying to get onto the front foot as well in terms of the specialist provisions in mainstream. So we've got an ordered way to do it. We've got a ring-fence budget now. We've got clear visibility of the amount of spend that we're having to put in even to create these placements, so we can be really clear on that with the executive and really clear about what we need going forward. So it will be challenging for September 2025, but we're putting all the plans with our colleagues in the Education Authority in place to make sure that we again deliver in terms of placements for children.
Okay. And just my second question, Susie, was on sort of Capital. You mentioned a few figures in an earlier answer. I think the independent review, you mentioned that there was maybe the figure I wrote down is about 25 for the transformation of SEN. You chunked that up a wee bit in terms of the figure over the next 10 years to maybe £1 billion. I suppose two aspects to this question, and that's let me finish, Chair. The first one is, those are quite significant figures. Is the department confident that the executive will ring fence the money, that sizable chunks of money for Capital? And then leading on from that, normally with capital, there's resource implications in terms of funding. So if somebody could pick up in terms of, you know, what's the department going to do, or how, and if we start to transform SEN, and if the capital is there, has someone thought about the amount of money that the executive would have to baseline in the department to try and deal with the resource implications of this sort of level of spend?
Yeah, so I think in terms...
We'll answer that briefly. I would ask if you could just...
Usually you just say yes and that would be it, you know.
to say we're up against it with time here would be an understatement.
Yeah, in terms of the 25 million, I mean, we're already dwarfing that. This year on the placements alone, we've invested, you know, over £51 million there. So you can see already, and we're not into the heart of the plan, because the heart of the plan is building significant numbers of new special schools, replacing existing provision and expanding. So that has huge costs. To give you, you know, just to give you one, for example, the new Belfast Special School that's been approved, you know, business cases coming in 500 children at £100 million. That's the sort of figures that we have. In terms of how we go forward, we are leading with SEN in our bids. You know, we have separated it out into a separate programme to make sure that it's clear to our colleagues in the Department of Finance, and it's clear to our colleagues, you know, the Minister's colleagues in the Executive, precisely the amounts that we have. We're developing an overall investment strategy in terms of capital that clearly sets out those needs. That's what we can do as officials. We can be clear on the need. In terms of the Executive, I don't think that's probably one for me to answer. And again, in terms... You know, Janice can pick up in terms of the resource implications coming behind, but absolutely, I think we are working very closely together in terms of trying to understand that we've set up, you know, various new structures, SEN Capital Programme Board, and also, you know, had a number of workshops around the plan and bringing together our policy colleagues, our area planning colleagues, capital colleagues, both in the Education Authority and in the department, to make sure that we've got that joined up approach, because it's not one or the other, it's the three parts of the triangle: the planning, the capital and the policy, all working together to make sure that we try to meet children's needs in the right way. Peter?
Yeah. And in terms
of the resource stuff, I think we've covered resource already. We're absolutely beat with time here, unfortunately. But this still, I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again before very long. I'm going to bring Colin in. I would ask Colin to be as brief as possible, and getting to the question would be great. Thank you. Colin can hear, or we've got audio.
He just needs to unmute himself.
You need to unmute yourself, Colin.
He knows that. He's just maybe...
No, yeah, you're with us now.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies to the committee and yourself, and also to the witnesses for being late to the meeting. Chair, just two quick questions, and it's around the process and the content of the actual end-to-end review. Can the witnesses confirm if there has been any evidence of any progress on the 200 recommendations that have been acknowledged in the previous reports and reviews? And also, has the end-to-end review brought anything new to the surface that wasn't already covered in the previous recommendations?
Thank you, Colin. I mean, I think in terms of, as I said, you maybe missed at the very start, I'm not sure, but in terms of those 200 recommendations, some of them are years old, right? So we've had a series of reports, all done by various agencies over the years, and we have brigaded those 200 recommendations together, and that's what drove the 12 work streams under the end-to-end review. So the key recommendation was from the Ipsos review of special educational needs processes, the first action of which asked the department to lead a review, an end-to-end review of special educational needs, and to develop a clear plan of action. So that's how the end-to-end review was set up, and the outworkings of that review will show the clear line of sight between those 200 recommendations and the action plan that we have developed, or the delivery plan that we have developed. In terms of new things that have come forward, the landscape has changed. If you look back since 2017, the landscape have changed. Complexity of need has become greater. We have many more children in the system. We've had our SEN placements issues every year, so it was important for the department to go out under those 12 work streams and talk to stakeholders now about the issues they're facing. Yes, broadly, when you look at it, the issues are the same, but for some, they're actually more urgent, and they're more dense. When we start to look at the complexity of need in our classrooms, when we start to take into account the last 8 or 9 years where there has been, not enough teacher professional learning. So I think having that end-to-end review was important, that the department got to engage directly with people rather than reading historical reports. We do have the 200 recommendations don't sit there in the ether. We do have to report back on each of those, and I can certainly contact you with any of those reports that we've sent back into Nikki or to the audit office. We can give you that, because if I went through all 200 of them now, we'd be here for quite some time. But yes, in short, there have been some things taken forward from those 200 recommendations.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. I think we are to say we've gone over time is an understatement. Danny, you had wanted to come in with something very brief, and I'm going to be
clear. Brief, it's not a question. It's just I do have concerns around the number. They just answered me around 34 children, because in my constituency alone, I know of 24 children will be entering primary in the next fortnight, so that's 24, never mind the cases that I would have anyway. So what I was going to ask is, could we get a breakdown of all the children when they accessed school, when they were given their placements back when in start of year like everybody else, but when they actually started, can we have a breakdown of that there, and then that might help us come to see how many hours are being missed, because I think a big question is going to be the department following up will be how are we going to make up them hours, whether that's extra support during summer or time they got there like summer schemes or whatever way it is.
I can ask for that update from the Education Authority, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate so that. Obviously we'll want to hear back from yourselves once the plan is available, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you at that stage. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and appreciate that was a long session, so thank you. Okay, so while the witnesses are on the way out, we'll just have a quick reflection on actions, and just apologies to members for the running over time, but I think it speaks to the level of priority that has been attributed to this issue at committee. So Danny, you've agreed, you'd proposed an action there around getting that information back from officials around those children who are placed but not attending school, getting a proper breakdown of that. Cara, you had an individual case which I think you picked up with the official. Is there anything else that we want to add in terms of actions for the department arising from this?
Could we ask for a breakdown on the numbers of allied health professionals that are there to provide support, and a designation of what discipline they're in?
Maybe to add any assessment of gaps in that workforce as well would be helpful. Okay, Kathy, had you indicated? I thought I heard the clerk.
Well, it's just on that there around the midst what I was saying, it's an equality issue. Like it's alright saying on paper X amount of children are placed, but if they're sitting in the house and they're missing, even in our school, but I know, as I made the point, around 300 plus hours for most mainstream kids, some are sitting on 30 minutes, maybe even a week's worth of school at the best.
Yep, absolutely unacceptable.
I've had around that in the past is whenever someone get, now hopefully it doesn't happen this year, but they've already lost a lot of the year already, but people who get placed quite late in the year, they've essentially lost a year of proper education, and whether they're ever given the option to sort of, if they wish to repeat that year.
For age retention, it should be an option for a child with a statement.
But even still, that support, they're saying that there's support, but really when you delve into your constituency and you talk to parents, and when parents say, like, well, my kid only got 30 minutes.
I'm going to have to say that probably discussion will have to be cut short on this, because we're very much over time. So I'm going to propose, Michelle's looking to come in.
Yeah. I jump in. I just wanted to pass comment on how inappropriate I thought your re-jibe at me was. This is a really, really serious thing that we were talking about today. We all prefaced at the start how impactful this is on people's lives, how families are dealing with this issue, and to hijack it just to make a wee petty political jibe at me, I thought was so inappropriate. I'm used to it now. I think every time we bring challenge, either to the department or to the minister, I'm faced with some kind of random political tirade that comes back. That was a little jibe, it was nothing near a tirade, but I really think that wasn't the appropriate one to kind of take the opportunity to have a wee jibe at. I think I think these committees are about doing what our job is, which is to ask questions robustly, to challenge. That's our job. I know some people think it's about Facebook posts and trying to manufacture headlines. I don't. I think we're here to do a job whereby we ask the questions, we get the answers. And I just felt in that context, I didn't appreciate it at all. I'm well able for it, don't worry, but I just thought for the people who are watching how important that issue was, I felt it was inappropriate.
I don't think it was
very briefly.
Well, I don't think it was a tirade, and I don't think I don't share the idea that took it away from the issue. I mean, it's nothing that hasn't happened before. You were on committee with myself and Pat in the run up to money's being allocated. That all I was commenting upon is you said we want to fight for you to get that money, and all I'm saying is that I hope that that's reciprocated whenever the decisions are being made at the executive level. I hope that eagerness to support the Minister in achieving those money is supported at Alliance and Executive table. I think that's a relevant point. It means that those words are not just cheaply thrown out, but actually whenever the rubber hits the ground,
we have very conscious of it.
You're keeping going with the point I was
I'm going to draw a line under this discussion.
I kind of a wee small point on that, because it is down to etiquette when we're in here, because I get then jump across and say the Minister said last week that we're the poor cousin of Westminster, and I could be saying, well, see, all that we're talking about today that can only be achieved in a New Ireland. We don't do that, so I don't think we should be doing that when members are talking or answering questions either. I don't think so.
It's whenever it was my turn to talk, I wasn't cutting across anybody in that respect.
No, but it was
I think everybody has had their opportunity to speak to this. I'm happy to move on to the next item on the agenda, but I would like to say, I know we're short on time, but to suggest, given the time, a short comfort break for everybody. But I'm going to be really clear. 4:30 we're starting the evidence session, so if you're not on your place, you'll miss the start of the session. So if we can just move into closed session from
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay. Members, that is us back into open session, and it takes us on to the next item on our agenda, and it's item 8, which is an oral briefing from the Department of Education in relation to its response to the independent review of education. So I would refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 166 and a briefing paper from the department at page 168 in your packs. So just get the officials through and then we'll make a start. So while the officials are just getting seated, I'll go through the introductions. We have Andrew Scott with us, Director of the Independent Review Corporate Services and Governments at the department. We have Claire McClelland, Director of Raising Aspirations, Supporting Learning and Empowering Improvement Department. These job titles don't get any shorter. And then, well, fortunately for Karen McCulloch, Director of Qualifications, 14 to 19 Strategy and Youth Work Policy at the department. So you're all very welcome here today, and I apologise for the lateness of this session starting. You were meant to be in a lot earlier than this, but our last evidence session was definitely one that we perhaps were a little bit ambitious in terms of how quickly we could get through that evidence, so I appreciate your patience. So at this stage really it is clearly a subject of huge significance to education, in the long term in terms of the strategic transformation agenda, but also in terms of those actions that have been already outlined by the Minister. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you, and we are very open as a committee to hearing from you again if we're not able to cover all of the information that we need to today. But at this stage I will hand over for an initial presentation or opening remarks. I would say up to 10 minutes. Given the time, there's absolutely no pressure to hit that target. So if it can be less than that, that is very helpful. And then we will move to question and answer from members. So over to yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the committee for the opportunity to brief today. A written brief has been provided from the Minister in advance of today, but I thought it might be useful to outline the key points given the importance of the independent review. Members will be aware that the independent review of education was a commitment that was outlined in New Decade, New Approach in early 2020, and work on that was commissioned by the Minister at the time, Minister McElveen, on behalf of the Executive. Work had commenced in October 2021 and concluded 2 years later with the publication of the report at the end of last year. And since then, the Department and the wider education sector has taken time to consider the response to that report. I know that the committee has received presentations from the panel members earlier this year, and they have outlined the wide-ranging nature of the report. The report itself, members will be aware, outlined 25 key recommendations in addition to 106 more detailed recommendations beyond that. And it titled its report Investing in a Better Future, because they believe that education is the greatest investment that any society makes in its own future, and I will come back to that. The panel set out their vision for educational excellence, and they outlined a 20-year horizon that they envisaged the recommendations being implemented across, and associated costs with that. The recommendations were wide-reaching, covering everything from investment in education, early years education, childcare, reform of the curriculum, statutory assessment, and raising the age of compulsory education to 18, plus many others, including SEN, that I know the committee have just heard from colleagues on. As I said, the Minister and the Department have taken time to consider the response to the independent review, have engaged with others across the education family to consider the report and consider feedback, and the Minister last month, the 21st of October, provided a statement to the Assembly on his response on the 25 key recommendations. He outlined as part of that it would require a phased implementation of work, and he outlined then his initial steps on that longer term journey and where he would focus, and he outlined within that his priorities in addition to those that are already set out in the draft programme for government. Would include curriculum, assessment, qualifications, school improvement, and tackling educational disadvantage. In doing so, the Minister recognised that those would need to be underpinned by investment in the education workforce, particularly in high quality initial teacher education and ongoing learning and development thereafter. The reason why the Minister that set out those priorities were considered to be those matters that affect the core of the education system in the classroom, and areas where often there's feedback on the things that most particularly influence outcomes for children and young people. More detail on this will come. As I said, the Minister's just set out the direction in the last 3 weeks. One specific element that I would wish to draw out today, and is set out in the Minister's paper, is on raising the age of educational participation. As the Minister set out, tackling educational disadvantage is a key aspect to look at. He was particularly concerned that the variety in outcomes for children and young people being impacted by the age at which children and young people can leave formal education or training, and as such has agreed with the panel's recommendation to introduce legislation so that children and young people would remain in education or apprenticeship or training until the age of 18. That also cuts across the remit of his colleague, Minister for the Economy, and there will be further consideration of their arrangements for this and how this would come into effect. Subject to executive agreement, it would be intended that legislation would be introduced in this Assembly term, and I know the Minister would hope for the committee's support in prioritising that. I think it would be remiss of us not to outline the financial implications. So I know when the panel met with the committee before, it outlined the importance of investment in education, and as they had outlined the challenge of historic and systemic cuts in education at the moment, the underfunding that was there in comparison to other jurisdictions, and beyond that, the need for a continued investment, including to deliver on the recommendations that were outlined in the report and indeed the Minister's response to that. The degree of investment will determine the degree of pace on how quickly we can move forward. I know the Minister is in agreement with the panel's assertion of education being critical to building a prosperous and sustainable future and a strong economy and society. I'll just also outline to the committee the way forward on this. Whilst the Minister has only recently announced the response to this, that's not to say work on this has not already been progressing. I know the committee will already just heard on work on special education needs and plans that are progressing there. There are already end-to-end reviews underway on school improvement. There's been progress on early years on the childcare. I know that's a key area for this committee as well, with more work to be developed on that. There's also recently announced a curriculum review to try to progress work on this at pace. But we know much more must be done. But also it's important to say this is the start of a journey set across that 20-year horizon. And the work that the independent review panel have taken forward will inform the work of the department and the work of the sector, not just this year and across this mandate, but in the years to come as well. I'm conscious of the committee's time today. We'd originally proposed to have 2 sessions, and I think we may well get great value out of keeping a second session in there. This was originally intended to give the committee a high-level overview of the response, and just focusing on those high-level priorities, perhaps the ministerial priorities and the committee priorities that are there. I know the committee's recently heard from Janice and colleagues on SEN. And last week, I believe you had Paul Brush in to talk about early years and childcare, but perhaps we could pick up on some other areas. But the second session will maybe give a greater opportunity to delve into more of the detail on this, if members would see benefit in doing that. If there are specific questions that arise today that we can't cover, we could either pick those up in the second session, or if there's anything with a degree of urgency, we can respond in writing, Chair. So I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you for that presentation, and I'm certainly can't see any scenario where the committee's not going to be content with another session on the independent review and to start to get into some of those specific areas. Conscious you would probably need representatives from absolutely every directorate within the department to cover everything that could come up on the independent review, so it does present challenges from your end. In sort of in keeping with your remarks around a sort of a higher level approach, the panel and indeed your briefing was clear that the review is going to require a long-term framework to deliver progressive reform. I think that's the phrase that is used. On that basis, can you give us a bit of understanding as to why the Minister seems to be taking an approach around sort of selecting a number of recommendations, which members may have different views on? Some we may like, some we may not. We could probably all pick our favourite recommendation and ask about it. Is there any plan to actually develop a strategic long-term response to the independent review to set out a transformation agenda for that sort of really serious long-term period? Because I'm concerned that particularly when we have cycles of collapse of the executive, we come back and there's a rush then to just fix stuff, and sometimes it'll be, well, that's the cheapest recommendation or that's the easiest recommendation. In the spirit of the review, I don't think cheapest and easiest is necessarily what's going to deliver the progressive reform that we need. So I suppose it's really just trying to get to, are we going to see that vision for long-term transformation set out? And if we are, when are we going to see it?
Yes, Chair. The short answer to that is yes. And that was one that the Minister referenced in his oral statement, that there was a need to bring forward a more detailed reform strategy. So work on that will progress and provide more detail on this, because as the Chair's outlined, I know the panel did not see this as something that you could cherry pick from, that there would need to be a more holistic approach to how this was taken forward. So the Minister's response was not to pick out ones that he could progress in advance. It was an issue of areas of focus. So if you see, whenever you read the response to the 25 recommendations, under each of those, there is a degree of work that's to be taken forward under each of the individual recommendations. But he's at the same time, he has also highlighted what he considers his priorities to be over the current mandate. But work will progress across each of those recommendations.
And again, that's sort of the second part of my question. When do you think we'll see that? Will we see that long-term sort of strategic approach being set out in this mandate? Is that something that you would
yes, I would expect so. I think you're looking at a matter of weeks or months rather than years, and that I think you need to set out the longer-term direction for this mandate and beyond.
That's helpful, because I think if this is if that aspect of it carries over to another mandate, I think you begin to lose momentum very quickly. And I know we're talking about different things, but we've seen from the briefing we've just had on SEN, when we get into a recommendation checklist exercise to deal with any substantial issue, it it's very clear from that policy area it doesn't get us very far. So I'd certainly be really keen to see that coming forward. I'm going to ask one more question, and it's just around one of the specific areas that you have highlighted. It's that raising the age of participation in education. There's a lot of things we could do, and I think there's probably a whole session on that in itself that we would need to look at, and its crossover with economy, I think, in terms of those pathways and the 14 to 19 framework. Really, it's a huge area, because I don't think things are functioning in that space well at the moment. And if we bring in new legislation to actually increase the numbers of young people participating, which I welcome, we need the pathways to be there. But I wanted to focus on the SEN aspect of that specifically. We've referenced today already Caleb's cause and that campaign that is running around that transition piece for young people with SEN, and what happens beyond age 19. So in terms of looking at raising the age of participation to 18, do you think that the provision, how are you going to ensure that the provision for SEN learners in that space is appropriate, that there are the appropriate pathways for SEN learners to continue in education to age 18, and also will the transition planning process be factored into that when you're looking at that raising the age of transition? Because for many cases these young people will be in school to 18, but they have a cliff edge at that stage. So it's really to make sure that we don't have another policy area in education where SEN learners are left behind again. So the aspiration is there to raise that age of participation. How will the needs of SEN young people be prioritised there?
Yes, Chair. I think that is one that there's going to need to be a lot of policy development work on. The Minister set out the intention to proceed with the recommendation provided by the panel, and the detail of it does need to be considered. I know at the outset the intention is that is taken forward for all children and young people, including SEN learners. So the intention would be that actually the arrangements that are put in place will be inclusive of children and young people for SEN, but also, as you mentioned earlier, look beyond the 18 age to make sure that the cliff edge issue that's been mentioned before can be assisted. If you want to comment further.
I'm very conscious that is a piece of work that's been progressed with DFE as well, about what happens post-19 for young people like that. But I think you made a really important point about the wide range of policies that we're going to have to look at in relation to this recommendation. You know, it's not just around this curriculum, qualifications, admissions, planning, but all have to be, have inclusion as part of it as well.
I think it's just really important to note, and I will then move on as we are short in time, that it is a great aspiration. I agree to raise the age of participation to 18, but for SEN learners, you get them to 18, and they may then face a very, very rapid cliff edge at that point. And I think I would just want to emphasise and put on record that that work with the economy in that space is absolutely crucial if this policy aspiration is going to deliver. So I'll leave it at that. Deputy Chair, do you want to?
Thanks, Andrew, for that. And you mentioned yourself the focus is going to be on reforms and improvements to curriculum, assessments, qualifications, school improvements, and tackling educational disadvantage, and that an evidence-based approach will be pursued. And that's quite an amount of reform in a relatively short space of time. So what are you hoping to see changed or delivered by the end of this mandate? What does success look like?
Well, success, Chair, looks like progress being made on each of those areas. I suppose it's important to outline that the independent review didn't land into a vacuum, so there'd been policy development and work going on in each of these spaces for quite some time. But success is going to simply be a better position than where we are at the moment in each of those. So if I might just outline briefly each in turn, and colleagues may wish to comment further on that. Curriculum has been an area that's been identified, not just within the independent review, but in other reports as curriculum as being hugely important to the success of children and young people and the experience in the classroom. So the review that's recently been commissioned and that will report early in the new year will really outline what the direction looks like. So until we see that work conclude, we won't know the specifics of what changes will come into place before the end of the mandate, but we would certainly expect to see changes for the better. in terms of assessment
I'm
qualifications?
just thinking qualifications is maybe a good example. So there were the independent review had made quite a few comments about qualifications. What the Minister has committed to is that within this mandate there will be a review of the specifications of qualifications here, and so that is working with SEN to look at the existing qualifications and make sure they are, up to date, fit for purpose, relevant, remain portable, comparable, that kind of approach. And we have provided some additional funding to see a regulation, because the first stage of that is the development of a regulatory framework. So that's already underway, and the Minister has said he wants that done within this mandate. He'd also committed then to qualifications reform, and I quoted about saying he wanted to start a conversation about that. So by the end of this mandate, we'd expect to see a direction of travel on that, because if you think from the point where you start to look at qualifications to the time, say, it's first awarded, that can take 9-10 years to do, but you need that first part set in the direction. And again, we've started some work on that, and we have commissioned OECD to take forward a piece of work looking at best practice and make it really evidence informed about what is happening in other jurisdictions and the kind of issues we need to look at. That's more fundamental reform about the structures. So that's just an example maybe of how.
Okay, and in terms of evidence, making this evidence-based, are you looking at other jurisdictions, and specifically are you looking at the DAESH schools in the south?
In the context of assessment?
Well, in the context of all those issues of reform, but particularly educational disadvantage, because the ESRI report that was published last year showed that there are far fewer students in the south leaving school without qualifications than there are here, and that far more students in the south are going on to third level education than here. So we're very close to another jurisdiction that clearly is performing better than our system. So, but I mean, I wouldn't want you just to focus specifically on the south. I mean, there are other international examples of very good education systems, talk about Finland or wherever. So I'm just wondering, are you looking at these?
I know Claire might want to come in on tackling disadvantage and that specifically. I know in general, yes, the intention is to learn from, making sure we're learning from best practice, and I know that's specifically that's in the terms of reference for the review of the curriculum, for instance, of making sure that we're learning from best practice, so that we can build on what we can learn from other jurisdictions closer to home or further afield, and apply that here.
Yeah, so in terms of tackling educational disadvantage, one element of the RAISE programme through that shared island investment will be looking at how do we learn from the DAESH programme, and equally how do we share the really good practice that goes on in our schools here as well. So that will be a key focus. Another area where we will make progress in this mandate is the end-to-end review of school improvement, and that is ongoing. And what we are doing is we are developing a new policy for school improvement, and the intention is that we'll be in a position to consult on that, on the policy proposals, and a new service delivery model to support schools in terms of school improvement in the spring as well.
Okay, and I suppose just a final question, Chair. Is this programme of work underpinned by a budget? Have you already been given a budget, or is it dependent on further allocations?
It's both, Chair, in that some of this work is already ongoing and work that the department is committed to, and our work is shaped around. But I think there are going to be certain aspects of that as we come out and particularly go through review stages, that there is going to be an ask around funding from that, as outlined really by the panel, and they gave estimated costs against each of the recommendations. And I think it would be remiss of me to try to pretend that we can deliver this degree of change without the degree of investment coming into that.
All right, thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for coming today. I just wanted to ask you about the single Early Intervention and Learner Support Agency. There was a recommendation around that, which I don't think is going forward. Just wanted to be clear why that's not moving forward at this stage.
Yes, so that was a recommendation around learner-centred interventions, and the panel had provided some recommendation around structural change across the education system. The Minister considered those, and he's taken the view that actually to focus on large-scale structural change across the education system risks the focus becoming on the education system rather than on children and young people. He does not rule that out in the longer term, but at this stage he wishes to focus on some work that is already underway around end-to-end reviews of school improvement, around end-to-end reviews of SEN that was mentioned today, and see the outworkings of those and the changes that those would bring about across the education system, and expect that to make a difference for children and young people, and if it doesn't, to review the position at that point.
So in terms of the stuff that's happening this mandate, have you got like a priority of the things that will happen next, or are you just then waiting to see what happens with, just to understand what you've said, you're looking at what happens in terms of some of the other reviews that you're doing across the department already, to see then and analyse that at that point to see if that will add additional value, or is it achieving, if it will achieve the aims that are intended?
Well, I suppose the expectation is to see out those reviews. I'm not close enough myself to know the detail of those reviews, but we expect those reviews will require some changes and improvements in performance across the organisations that are delivering services for children and young people, and we would expect to see those then being implemented. So the ministers will reserve the right, or future ministers to reserve the right to revisit that large-scale structural change if they considered it necessary. But we want to keep the focus on those reviews that are already in progress and achieve the outcome that the panel set out of better learner-centred interventions, but without the overhead of large-scale structural change.
Okay. And just and one of the expressions or the terminology that jumped out was just the role of knowledge-based curricula in reducing inequality in education. What is that specifically, and why has that been referenced specifically? How does that contrast to what we're doing right now?
Yeah, I'm not from a curriculum area, so I don't feel I can talk to the detail of that. I know that is something that's been outlined then for the curriculum review and around the knowledge and skills issue around how children and young people learn. I know there's quite a bit of coverage on that actually within the detail of the independent review around the nature of learning, and I think that was one that the Minister was keen that we built on by undertaking a review to find out, well, how effective is the curriculum and the implementation of the curriculum, so that we can better learn from that. If there are more specific comments around the knowledge aspect of that, we can come back, maybe pick that up in the future session.
It's a phrase I hadn't heard. Obviously, I'm not an expert in curriculum either. Just thought, is that a particular type of approach that would be worth understanding why it was referenced now as the way forward almost in the approach that you're taking? But look, it's fine. Thank you.
That you, Michelle?
Yeah, that's
okay. Cara, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your update here today. I just have two questions. One of them is around, you talked there about reforming and improving the curriculum. So ultimately we're preparing pupils for the world of work, and I had raised this before at committee last week, just around the changes that we'll need to our curriculum to reflect the changes in the job market. Just two questions then. It's just around AI and integrating AI in the classroom. I was recently at a conference and they were talking about right across the globe, different schools are exploring how the tech can be used to better educate and do individual learning for pupils, and then education about AI to prepare young people for the job market, if that's something. Just if you have any updates, maybe not to hand today. And then just my second question there is just around I really appreciate that the document provided in our packs includes tackling education disadvantage, and one aspect of that of course is the mental health and well-being of the child, and in identifying those barriers that inhibit positive outcomes, one of them of course is whatever's going on in the home. And I'm just wondering, to what degree do you think problems in the home, for example like a child of an alcoholic, will face particular challenges and barriers with education that a child who doesn't come from a home of that nature will experience? Is there anything there you're doing to explore how we can support children who face particular adversity at home and then come to school? I don't know if that's clear, but maybe you can understand.
Yeah, I get to sit this one out. I think Karen, you're going to pick up on it.
No, it was just to give you a little update on the issue of the AI, and that is a piece that lots of parts of the education system are starting to look at and is here to talk about. We are looking within the department at what our role will be in that and what kind of area. advice and guidance we'd be giving on it. So there are people in EA and SEA looking at it. But I think it is a point that you make. There's kind of two sides to it. There's the safety online and everything, there's that aspect, but there's then the application of that to teaching and learning. So we are picking up on both those pieces.
And then just back to the point about children facing particular adversity, with regards to our curriculum, is there any changes around being trauma informed so that children who are facing sort of complex issues in the home, that our education system can provide wraparound support and identify abuse? And there has been amazing projects like Encompass, which are doing that great work about transparency and informing teachers. Just a little bit more about that. You may not have it to hand today, but just because there's some amazing groups. I was the chair of Addiction and Dual Diagnosis All-Party Group, and in some of the witnesses that we had, they had talked about how their childhoods were shaped by like alcoholism in the home and how it impacted their education. So that's why I'm using that example here today.
So, of course, children and young people face many barriers in terms of learning, and there's a couple of things. So first of all, the emotional health and wellbeing piece. The department, working with the Department of Health, has the emotional health and wellbeing framework in schools. So there's a range of support available in there for children and young people. In terms of the trauma-informed practice piece, the Education Authority has rolled out a significant programme of helping and supporting and developing trauma-informed practices in schools. Alongside that, you've mentioned Operation Encompass. So there's a full suite of different programmes. One area that we're progressing at the minute is the RAISE programme. So that whole community approach to education provides a real opportunity to work not just within schools but across communities to identify what those barriers are, but also to look for solutions. You know, how can communities look for solutions and work together across the board to support those young people ultimately to access education and to improve their outcomes. So there's quite a suite of interventions there at the minute, and there are opportunities, you know, coming through with for example, RAISE.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Say words I'm not used to here. We've not had any other indications here, unless anyone's going to want to come in. You may all regret that, because I had a third question which I hadn't asked, and I'm going to ask it now for sure. And actually, I was really gutted I didn't get to ask it, so that's great. Thank you, members. The third question I was going to ask was around, I'm going to say the words academic selection, and probably everyone will groan, but I took the time to have a look at what the review said about this, and it was so explicit. It stated that the current process perpetuates a socio-economic division between selective and non-selective schools. This has an important impact on the teaching environment. Assessment also affects the curriculum at Key Stage 2, with teaching time devoted to test preparation. These factors affect children who do not sit the test as much as those who do. The test cannot be repeated and is taken at a very early age. Research has demonstrated such tests are fallible as predictors of later performance. For these reasons, we believe that the current arrangements should not continue. I mean, I think those are pretty clearly set out, and I'm not sure everybody anticipated that the panel were going to make that recommendation, but that's the recommendation that we have. You'd mentioned that the Minister was keen on dealing with things that impact children. That's a recommendation there that really clearly sets out this affects children who sit the test and those who do not. It affects their access to the curriculum. So can we get more detail about why that one has been parked? It would be good to understand, because I get contact every year from parents who are concerned about their children sitting an unregulated test that's not accountable to the wider education system. It would be good to understand why there's not even initial work, scoping work, even thinking about this issue. It just seems to have been completely parked.
Yeah, Chair, happy to respond on that. The Minister's position on this is in looking at the journey across 20 years of reform on this, and looking at what the first steps on that would be within his current mandate. He's choosing what to focus on. I know he was asked this question in giving his statement to the Assembly, and his response to that outlined his focus in this needs to be on the areas where they're one most closely related to the child's experience in the classroom in terms of curriculum, assessment, qualifications, those sorts of things. But also he's conscious of the varying different views across the political parties and society on this, and he believed that this wasn't an area where there was a great degree of consensus. And I think the panel were, even in outlining their recommendation, did recognise that. So the Minister's chosen to focus on those areas that he believes there is consensus that he can drive forward change within the current mandate. That's not to say that's not something that won't be considered in the future.
So it was me who asked the question in the chamber, and I wasn't that keen in the answer, which is why I'm asking it again, I suppose. But I think for me it is just the concern that for some of these issues that may be more difficult, more tricky, where there isn't consensus, that if we continually defer them because they're in that difficult box, we'll simply never get to them. So I'm not suggesting that there's just a tap we can turn off and that the academic selection will be done and dusted overnight if a minister were to decide it. I don't think anybody in this room, whatever your view on it is, would imagine that's a scenario that could be delivered. It's really just a concern that if we're not even looking at it, if we're not even going to look at other models, if we're not going to look at international best practice, if we're not going to look at the research, how do we ever get to the issue to make any decision?
Well, I think it is important, Chair, also just to reflect that the Minister does intend for some work to be done around transition. Academic selection is the most notable and newsworthy element of that, but there are other aspects of transition that were mentioned in there, including smoothing of the curriculum between primary and post-primary, and also looking at post-16 transition as well and pathways there. So I think the intention is still to do work in that regard, but as he's outlined already to the Assembly, I know he says he does not see him prioritising the removal or moderation of academic selection in this mandate.
I didn't expect a different answer. I'm a bit at a loss to understand how you can look at transition and not look at academic selection. It is the significant issue in the primary to post-primary transition that is probably the most significant transition any child or young person makes in our system. But
Could I come in just
yes, you can come in
briefly, Chair. You know, because we commission all these reports and from experts, and don't think any of us would class ourselves as experts in the field. So we get others to come in and do it, and then they make recommendations, and then a minister says it politically he doesn't agree with it. So, and I know he didn't say it in those words, but that's what he meant. And so we don't bother with that recommendation, which according to the experts, the educationalists, the academics, it's damaging, not just to the system itself, but actually to the children. So as you know, a senior official yourself, Andrew, what would your view be on that?
That's not one that I'm going to get into. I think my response on that will be it's the Minister to determine his priorities. The Minister has 2 and a bit years left of this mandate, and he needs to set a direction for the department. He knows that this is a 20-year journey, and he set out the initial priorities for the department to focus on, and that's what we'll do.
Okay. Well, we'll obviously different views around the table on that. So I had offered an opportunity for other members to come in, which everyone declined. So, but David has indicated. So I will take a comment, maybe rather than a question from David, and then I think I had offered it.
No, it wasn't. I'm not on academic selection. Although I do think
I'm on something else.
There's very few ministers.
I had offered members the opportunity.
Yes,
to
I do appreciate that.
I did this.
Declined.
I did this. You never saw me.
I think on that basis, if it is a question, I will just draw a line because we are very tight in time, and I had offered that opportunity, which was declined. But
okay. It was just on. It's up to you whether you want to stop it or not. It was just around whether there's been anything done around that post 16 transition and talk of the working with the tertiary colleges and so on to in some of those more vocational subjects earlier in people's educational journey, but perhaps you can.
David, as you've broken with tradition and got straight to the question, I'll let that one in. So there we go.
Yeah. This is about the pre-vocational from age 14. That recommendation around there. Yes. So within our system at the moment, there is an opportunity to do that through the entitlement framework. So young people have to have access. It is the schools have to offer a broad curricular offer, and in terms of qualifications, they have to offer at Key Stage 4 at least 21 qualifications, and similarly at post 16. And in that they have to offer, a third have to be general, a third apply, and then the other third can depend on the needs and interests of the young people there. And in delivering that, they don't all have to be offered in the school that you're in, because the system can't afford that and there isn't the teaching of that. So you can then access FE colleges. The other thing that we'd had, and it was mentioned in the Minister's statement, were occupational studies, which were designed to give young people a flavour of the kind of courses that are offered in FE, and that's one of the areas we're going to look at to make sure that those are still relevant and align with the FE curriculum as well. So it's about improvement in that area, really, but it is there, but we are going to have a look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Peter, in the interest of fairness, to ensure everyone around the table has had the opportunity to ask a question, I will bring you in. I would just emphasise that in future meetings that I do offer everyone in every briefing the opportunity to ask a question, and when members decline that, I take that on good faith. But on this occasion, I will bring you in, but perhaps one to note for future meetings.
I appreciate that, Chair, and just for noting, we're actually 5 minutes ahead of the committee session time, because we started at 4:30 and we've only had 40 minutes of the session so far, so apparently there's 5 minutes left for questions. I only have one, and it's taking you guys to Chapter 8, Structures and Single System of the Independent Review, and there's a section here, Managing Authority Rule 8.17. Managing Authority Rule has always been a challenge because EA provides a wide range of services to other schools. This results in complicated systems for school management, which are in particular suboptimal for the control sector. This has been compounded by the terms of the Integrated Education Act 22, which has imposed a duty on the EA to support integrated education. And then later on in 8.2, it says, talks about specific support for the control sector, which is really what I'm driving towards. Do you believe that within the mandate there will be some movement in terms of greater support, either on a statutory or non-statutory footing, for the control sector, because they are the only sector that doesn't have it? You have CCMS, you have NICE and CNG, and I think the control sector loses out in that. It's always been a tension in the EA.
Just come in there. I think NICE and CNG are not managing authorities. I think that's a very important point to clarify. They are not managing authorities.
Yeah, there's other support bodies there. I mean, I think a tenor of my question, Chair, is really, do you feel that in the course of this mandate something will be done in terms of giving more support to control schools?
Yes, the Minister's very keen that we prioritise work on controlled schools to make sure that there is an equity and consistency of support across all school sectors. And he's commissioned a task force to take that work forward. He had a meeting that I was with him yesterday to get an update from the chair of that task force, and is still expecting that he receives a report before Christmas outlining potential future direction on a controlled schools body.
And members probably want to note that the task force are scheduled to brief the committee, so we'll have the opportunity to look at that in more detail. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to assume in our conversation we will be looking now at a future engagement, and again perhaps with some focused areas of the review that we'd like to hear evidence on. So, but thank you for that initial overview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. So I would just want to seek agreement very quickly that we are content to factor that into the forward work programme in terms of a future briefing from the independent review, and maybe we may need different policy areas to allow us to get into some of the detail that we may want on some of those issues. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Is there anything else arising from that in terms of anything else we were looking for from the officials? No. Okay. So you'll be pleased to know we've covered item 9, which is correspondence. So that takes us to item 10, which is the forward work programme. Not the forward work programme. That's something very different. So the
Pansar gets that one.
The forward work programme has actually been tabled just during the meeting, so whether or not members have access to that or not, I don't think that there are any substantially different changes. I think there are a couple of academics in our inquiry have been moved around. There's a couple of informal briefings for other groups and individuals who were interested in presenting to the inquiry. So I'll probably just ask members to note that at that stage, as I'm not confident everybody will have seen it, and we can get that formally endorsed next week if required. So at this stage, with the exception of those minor changes, are we happy with to endorse the forward work plan as drafted? Okay, agreed. Item 11 then is any other business. Is there any other business?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in there about the point I'd raised about Irish medium education. I was just doing a bit of texting back and forth, and they've said, yes, we are liaising with the department on end-to-end review outcomes, but feel ignored by the initiatives brought forward so far by the department despite our engagement. So there's like a bit of a feeling what's been brought forward so far doesn't have any specific provision for IME pupils. So I've advised maybe they could write in some correspondence. It's open to members, but maybe in the forward work programme we could find a way to integrate the ability for them to share their lived experiences. Or
I think it was clear in your questioning there was definitely some perhaps crossing of wires between the two organisations and between the sector and the department, and I think maybe unlikely there was necessarily would have been a meeting of minds there. So I would be open to propose that we invite Sina G, have you been in touch with there, to even to send in sort of a written summary of their concerns around that, and then we can committee can decide what to do with that. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay. So that's moves us on then to the last item 12, and that's date, time and place of next meeting. The next committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 27th of November 24 at 2 p.m. in room 29. So that leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. We agreed? Agreed.
Committee room 29. Sound. 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 Committee room 29. Sound.